Welcome back to another story on Arcane Paradox. This time, we're bringing you, what if Fawkes burned every block on Harry at welcoming feast and Dumbledore's 51-year plan collapsed. Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The Phoenix Doesn't Ask Permission. The Great Hall was exactly what 11-year-old Harry Potter had been promised it would be: enormous, impossible, and lit by what appeared to be several thousand floating candles that had no business staying in the air. The ceiling was gone, replaced by a sky that Hermione Granger, who Harry had met on the train and already found slightly exhausting, had explained was enchanted to reflect the actual weather outside. It was a cloudy night. Dark, fast-moving clouds rolled across a field of stars that kept appearing and disappearing, and the candlelight threw the long house tables into warm gold relief. The smell of food, real food, not the thin approximation of it that the Dursleys had permitted him, was already filling the hall, and Harry's stomach was making embarrassing noises about it. He sat at the Gryffindor table between Ron Weasley and a boy named Neville Longbottom who had already knocked over his goblet twice without it being filled yet, and he tried to absorb everything at once. The ceiling. The ghosts drifting through the walls like they owned the place, which he supposed they did. The teacher's table at the far end, elevated on a dais, where an enormous man with a silver beard that made him look like something carved into a mountain was watching the first years file in with an expression of genuine, uncomplicated delight. That was Dumbledore. Harry knew that much from the Hogwarts, a history passages Hermione had recited on the train, and from some older instinct he couldn't quite name, a sense that this particular old man had been watching him for a very long time from a very comfortable distance. The sorting had just finished. Hermione had gone to Gryffindor, beaming so hard it looked structural. Harry had gone after a long pause during which the hat had spoken directly into his mind in a voice like old paper and wood smoke, offering him Slytherin with the particular tone of someone who was very certain they were right, and Harry had said no thank you with more firmness than he'd expected from himself. Gryffindor had erupted. The twins had started a chant. Ron had elbowed him in a way that was probably meant to be congratulatory. Now the feast was materializing out of nowhere, plates filling, bowls appearing stacked with roast potatoes and Yorkshire pudding and things Harry had no names for, and the hall was filling up with the particular noise of 400 hungry students who had spent a long day traveling and were now finally allowed to eat. Harry reached for the chicken. He got approximately 2 bites in when Fawkes arrived. There was no announcement. No warning. The doors to the Great Hall weren't even open. The Phoenix simply appeared at the far end of the room, near the ceiling, in the way that fire sometimes appears, not traveling from one place to another so much as simply choosing to exist somewhere new. One moment there was enchanted sky and floating candles. The next, there was a bird the size of a large cat, trailing feathers the color of the inside of a furnace, banking between the chandelier chains with a grace that made every other movement in the room seem clumsy by comparison. Harry noticed it because the boy across from him stopped mid-sentence and pointed upward with a fork. Then someone screamed, not in fear, just in the sudden noise way, and the whole hall looked up, and for about 3 seconds, 400 people sat in complete silence watching a phoenix navigate the Great Hall like it was perfectly normal and also urgently necessary. Professor Dumbledore was already standing. "Fawkes," he said, and his voice was not loud but it carried the way voices do when the speaker has spent decades ensuring they are heard. "Come back to the..." Fawkes did not come back. Fawkes folded his wings and dropped, in a long controlled dive, directly toward the Gryffindor first-year table, and Harry had just enough time to think that's heading toward me before the Phoenix pulled up and landed squarely in his lap. Every feather was the temperature of a lit stove. Not burning, Harry's hands weren't burning, and neither was his robes, but the heat was real, bone-deep and immediate, the kind that made the air taste different. Fawkes looked up at him with eyes that were bright orange and ancient in the way that made Harry feel, suddenly and without explanation, like he was the one who'd been around for a very long time and the bird was just checking in. Harry said. "Harry," Ron began. Then Fawkes opened his wings. The light was not the gold of candles. It was not the orange of the phoenix's feathers. It was white, a true, clean, sourceless white that came from somewhere inside the bird that was less like fire and more like the idea of fire, and it hit Harry like stepping into a current. Not painful. Not even uncomfortable. More like being submerged in water that was exactly body temperature, so that the boundary between yourself and the water became temporarily unclear. Harry heard something crack. Not in the room. Inside. Some internal architecture he hadn't known was there, hadn't known because it had always been there, like being unable to notice the walls of the house you grew up in because you'd never known what outside looked like, and it cracked, and then it cracked again, a series of hairline fractures running through something he could now feel the shape of simply because it was breaking. The light intensified. The cracks became something bigger. Harry felt a rushing sensation, not movement, but expansion, the way a room feels suddenly larger when you open a window, and then all of it happened at once, and the blocks didn't break so much as they ceased, the way a fist unclenches, not destruction but release. He gasped. It wasn't a sound he chose to make. Fawkes made one long, clear, devastating note, a phoenix song that lasted perhaps 4 seconds and felt like 4 years, and then burst into flame. The fire was instantaneous and total. One moment there was a phoenix. The next there was a small pile of ash sitting in Harry's lap, and then the ash shivered, and a very pink, very bald, deeply unimpressive hatchling the size of a grapefruit poked its head out and blinked at him with the expression of something that had absolutely no regrets about what it had just done. The great hall was entirely silent. Harry sat very still, covered in a fine layer of phoenix ash, with a newborn Fawkes in his lap, and became aware, in a way that was impossible to ignore and impossible to adequately describe, that the world had become approximately 4 times louder, brighter, more textured, and more present than it had been 30 seconds ago. The candles weren't just floating, he could feel the slight air disturbance from each flame. The enchanted ceiling wasn't just beautiful, he could feel the charm layered into the stonework above it, old magic like geological strata, spell on top of spell going back centuries. The wards on the castle walls, he couldn't name them, couldn't articulate what he was sensing, hummed at a frequency he'd apparently been deaf to his entire life. The magic in the room, from 400 students and a dozen professors, was suddenly as visible to him as body heat, and it was loud, and it was everywhere, and he had to breathe through it the way you breathe through something too bright. He looked up. Dumbledore was standing. His chair was pushed back. His face was, and Harry filed this away without knowing why, not the face of an old man watching something wonderful. It was the face of an architect watching a building he had carefully designed, carefully maintained, carefully managed for 11 years, begin to fall. Not cruel. Not angry, even. Something worse, the expression of a man watching a consequence he had hoped to avoid arrive anyway, on its own schedule. McGonagall, seated to his right, had her hand over her mouth. Quirrell, at the far end of the table, was very still in a way that was different from the stillness of everyone else. Everyone else was still with shock. Quirrell was still with attention. Harry looked away from the teachers and back down at Fawkes, who was regarding him from the ash pile with the incurious confidence of something that had done exactly what it intended and had no particular interest in explaining itself. "What," said Ron Weasley, in a voice entirely stripped of its usual color, "was that?" "A burning day," Hermione said, from across the table. Her voice was doing something complicated, trying to be explanatory and failing because her hands were shaking slightly. "Phoenixes do them periodically, they shed their old body and regrow from, but they don't just do them anywhere, they don't just," she stopped. Looked at Harry with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Harry. Are you all right?" "I think so." He tested the word. "Yes. Yes." He was, in fact, extraordinarily all right. That was the strange part. McGonagall was moving. She came down from the dais with the purpose of a woman who had decided that something was going to be handled correctly even if she had to personally ensure it, and she stopped at Harry's shoulder and looked at Fawkes with an expression that was professional on the surface and deeply, privately shaken underneath. "Potter," she said. "Are you hurt?" "No, Professor." She looked at him, really looked, the way adults rarely do with children, and something changed in her expression. A small recalibration. Like a woman who was very good at reading situations and was suddenly not certain she was reading this one correctly. "Come with me," she said. "The feast just started," Ron began. "Mr. Weasley." Her voice was entirely gentle. "Come with me, Mr. Potter." Harry picked up Fawkes carefully. The hatchling was hot but tolerably so, and gripped his finger with feet that seemed too small to be serious, and stood up. He was aware of the entire hall watching him. All 4 tables. All 400 students, and the teachers, and the ghosts who had drifted in from the walls at some point during all of this. He walked the length of the Gryffindor table toward the dais without hurrying, and the hall stayed quiet, and Dumbledore came down to meet him. They stood in the open space between the house tables and the teacher's platform, and Harry looked up at the headmaster, and the headmaster looked down at him, and there was a moment that was not quite a conversation but functioned like one. Dumbledore's eyes were doing the twinkling thing that everyone presumably found comforting. Harry noticed, with his newly uncluttered perception, that the twinkle did not reach the part of the old man's face that was actually doing the thinking. "Well," Dumbledore said, and his voice was warm and wondering, a performed wonder, Harry realized, overlaid on something more controlled. "It seems Fawkes has taken quite a shine to you, Harry." "It seems so," Harry agreed. "He's never done anything quite like that before." Dumbledore reached toward Fawkes, and the hatchling, still pink, still bald, still entirely undignified, turned away from Dumbledore's outstretched hand and burrowed further against Harry's thumb with a purposefulness that was unmistakable. Dumbledore's hand stilled. It was a small thing. A very small thing. But the pause that followed it lasted a half-second longer than it should have, and Harry, who had spent 10 years learning to read the silences in the Dursley household, the specific quality of silence that preceded a bad decision, catalogued it and moved on. "What happened?" Harry asked. "What did he do to me?" "A burning day is quite harmless," Dumbledore said. "A little startling, perhaps, but nothing to worry about. Fawkes simply chose an unusual location this time. Phoenixes can be rather impulsive creatures." Harry looked at Fawkes. Fawkes looked back at him with orange eyes that contained, he was quite certain, absolutely no impulse whatsoever. "Right," Harry said. McGonagall's hand landed briefly on his shoulder, a guiding pressure, and she steered him toward a side door, and Dumbledore fell into step beside them, and the 3 of them moved out of the great hall and into the corridor beyond while the noise of the feast slowly, uncertainly, resumed behind them. The corridor was lit by torches and significantly quieter. Harry could still feel the castle. It was like being aware of your own heartbeat, present and constant, something he presumably always had access to without the equipment to notice it. The stone under his feet had been here for 1,000 years. The magic in the walls had absorbed 1,000 years of spells, of students, of life and death and learning, and it pressed against the edges of his awareness with the patience of something that had been waiting for exactly this. He exhaled slowly and let it be background noise. "Harry," Dumbledore said, in the corridor, without the audience, his voice different, quieter, more precise, "I wonder if you might describe what you experienced." "You first," Harry said. McGonagall made a sound. Not loud. Not alarmed. More like the sound a person makes when something confirms something they were already thinking. Dumbledore's expression shifted into something fonder and a shade more careful. "I beg your pardon. You said Fawkes chose an unusual location." Harry kept his voice conversational, the way he'd learned to do when the Dursleys were in a difficult mood and clarity was a survival tool. "But he flew straight to me. He didn't land near me or circle me, he went directly to me and sat in my lap and then had his burning day." "That doesn't sound like a choice about location. That sounds like a choice about me. So if you're going to ask me what I experienced, it seems like you should probably already know what happened, and if you don't know, then neither of us knows, and we should say that. And if you do know," he paused. "Well. Then I'd rather hear your answer first." The corridor was quiet for the space of several torchlit seconds. Then McGonagall said, very quietly, "Merlin's beard." Dumbledore studied Harry with the gaze of a man recalibrating. Not the fond, warm twinkle of the headmaster at the feast. Something more genuine, and, Harry thought, more unsettled. Like a chess player who had just watched a pawn do something pawns were not architecturally supposed to do. "You are very perceptive," Dumbledore said, "for someone who has been in the wizarding world for approximately 12 hours. "I've been in the wizarding world for 11 years, Harry said. "I just didn't know it." He said it without heat. Without accusation. It was simply a thing that was true, and saying it felt like putting down something he'd been carrying without noticing. Dumbledore was quiet. Something passed through his expression that was too complex and too controlled to name, but was in the neighborhood of regret. "Perhaps," the old man said at last, "we should continue this conversation in my office." "I'd like to go back to the feast," Harry said. "I'm hungry, and I haven't met my housemates yet. Can we do the office thing tomorrow?" Another pause. "Of course," Dumbledore said. And smiled. And the smile was real, Harry thought, or at least, it was as real as anything the old man was capable of, which was real in the way that an architect's appreciation of a clean structural failure is real. Professional, involuntary, and entirely separate from warmth. Harry nodded, and turned back toward the great hall doors, Fawkes still balanced on his hand. McGonagall walked beside him, and he was aware of her occasional glances, sidelong, assessing, in the same way he was now aware of drafts and ambient spellwork. "Professor McGonagall," he said, quietly, as Dumbledore's footsteps went the other way, back toward the dais. "Yes, Mr. Potter. Is Fawkes going to be all right? After a burning day, I mean. He's very small." She looked at him for a moment. "He'll grow back over the next few days. It's quite natural." "Good." He paused at the door. "And Professor, the thing he burned away. Would you know what that was?" McGonagall's jaw tightened. It was brief and controlled and would not have been visible to someone who wasn't watching for it. "That," she said carefully, "is something I intend to find out." She held the door open for him, and the warmth and noise of the feast poured back out, and Harry walked back in and sat down next to Ron, who immediately demanded to know what had happened, and Harry shrugged and said the old man just wanted to check he was fine, which was technically not a lie, and reached for his chicken again. Across the table, Hermione was watching him with an expression somewhere between fascinated and worried, her brow furrowed in the way it would furrow, Harry suspected, when she was working out something she didn't have enough information to solve yet. He made a mental note to tell her everything. She seemed like someone who would be useful to have on the side of the truth. Neville passed him the potatoes. "Cool bird," Neville offered. He was looking at Fawkes, now perched on the edge of Harry's goblet, looking like he very much intended to stay there. "Thanks," Harry said. "He sort of came with me." "Lucky," Neville said, with the sincerity of someone who genuinely meant it. Harry looked down at Fawkes, who had tucked his small pink head under one wing with the dignity of someone very important taking a very necessary rest, and decided that lucky was probably the right word, even if it was also insufficient. The feast went on. The food was extraordinary. The noise was enormous and cheerful and alive in the way that Harry had only ever watched from outside windows, peering in at other people's ordinary warmth. The Weasley twins, 2 tables deep from where he sat, were already trading jokes with the Ravenclaw table and had somehow acquired an extra dessert. Percy Weasley was explaining something to a first year with the patience of someone who had been waiting for someone smaller to explain things to. The older Gryffindors were welcoming the first years with a casualness that was, Harry realized, the specific ease of people who had already passed through the door and were now holding it open. He ate everything on his plate and most of what was on Ron's. At the teacher's table, Dumbledore had returned to his chair and was, to all appearances, eating his own meal with serene contentment. But his eyes tracked Harry twice over the course of the evening with the careful regularity of a man monitoring a variable that had, without warning, changed. And at the end of the table, Professor Quirrell sat very quietly, a half-smile on his face that had nothing to do with the food or the noise or the candles or any of the ordinary warmth of the evening, eating nothing, eyes forward, wearing his thoughts the way someone wears a mask, not to hide his face, but because they've had it on so long they've forgotten the face is separate. Harry noticed him the way he was now noticing everything, not consciously, not analytically, but in the way a nerve notices heat. A background awareness that registered something here is wrong and filed it away for later. Later would come. But tonight there was food, and new friends, and a small pink bird who had chosen him without asking permission, and for the first time in his life, sitting in a hall full of people and warmth and magic, Harry Potter felt the specific and particular sensation of belonging somewhere. It was, he decided, an excellent start. The candles burned. The ceiling showed stars between the racing clouds. Fawkes slept in his lap, and the castle breathed around him, and Dumbledore's plan, though no one had said so aloud, though it would be weeks before Harry understood its full shape, had already, irrevocably, begun to come apart at the seams. Across the hall, the Sorting Hat sat on its stool, unattended now, and if anyone had been watching very carefully they might have noticed that its brim moved slightly, the way a mouth moves when someone says something very quietly to themselves. Not a warning. Not a prophecy. Just the particular tone of something very old acknowledging that something it had been waiting for had finally arrived. The feast ended around 10, and Professor McGonagall led the first years up through the moving staircases and the shifting corridors of Hogwarts, explaining the rules about the third-floor corridor in a tone that managed to be simultaneously clear and insufficient, and Harry listened and thought about what was on the third floor in a way he hadn't 20 minutes ago, when his mind had been a duller, softer, more easily redirected thing. Now the instruction had a shape, it was the shape of something being protected, and something being protected meant something worth knowing, and he noted it with the same quiet efficiency he'd noted Quirrell's stillness and Dumbledore's fractional pause, and the way McGonagall had asked what the thing Fawkes had burned was rather than saying she already knew. The Gryffindor common room revealed itself through a portrait of a fat woman in pink silk who demanded a password Percy gave with visible pride, and beyond it was a round, red and gold room full of squashy armchairs and a fire that was burning very cheerfully and staircases that led up to dormitories and the general warmth of a place that had been home to generations of people who'd been exactly as lost as he was on their first night. The older students scattered to homework or gossip. The first years gathered near the fire in the unconscious cluster of people who've shared a single unusual day and feel the bond of it. Ron flopped into a chair and said the password again under his breath, memorizing it. Hermione sat very upright on the edge of a sofa and said, "Harry, what actually happened in the corridor?" She said it without preamble, which Harry was already learning to appreciate about her. Dumbledore asked what I experienced, he said, sitting across from her. Neville, Dean, and Seamus had drifted close enough to listen without making it obvious. I asked him the same thing. He didn't answer. That's significant, Hermione said immediately. I know. Phoenix burning days aren't random, she continued. They happen when the Phoenix needs to renew itself, but the timing is up to the Phoenix, and they don't typically choose locations or people. It's biological, not intentional. She paused. Except that's clearly not what happened. Clearly, Harry agreed. So Fawkes chose to do it on you. Which means he was doing it for you. Which means he was burning something. She was leaning forward now, the way she would lean forward Harry would later understand, for the rest of their friendship, every time she was on the edge of something she couldn't quite see yet. What did it feel like? Be specific. So Harry was specific. He described it as accurately as he could, the white light, the internal cracking sensation, the expansion, the sudden sharpening of everything, and Hermione sat very still through all of it, and when he finished she said nothing for nearly 30 seconds, which seemed to cost her something. Blocks, she finally said. Magical suppression. Someone put blocks on your magic. The fire popped. Ron looked between them. That's not legal, Neville said, from the periphery of the group, unexpectedly and with some certainty. Everyone looked at him. My Gran mentioned it once, he said. He looked at his hands. She knows about it because my parents, he stopped. Then went on, quieter, there are cases where blocks get put on children if they're too powerful and it's deemed a safety risk. It's a ministry thing, there's a whole process. But the blocks are supposed to come off on their own when you turn 11, when you start Hogwarts, because by then you've got training. He paused. Only sometimes they don't come off. And sometimes they're not put on by the ministry. The fire was very loud in the silence that followed. Who else can put them on? Harry asked. Neville looked at him steadily. He was rounder-faced and less certain of himself than the others, and Harry would come to understand that there was an entire person inside Neville Longbottom that the world had spent 10 years sitting on, but right now, in this moment, he met Harry's eyes without flinching and said, a powerful enough wizard. If they knew what they were doing. Harry nodded. He thought about Dumbledore's face in the moment after Fawkes flew from his hand. He thought about the precise, architectural quality of the old man's surprise. He thought, he knew what they were. He didn't say it. Not yet. He didn't have enough of the picture. But he held it, carefully, in the part of him that had always been there, that had survived 10 years of deliberate diminishment in the Dursley household, that had answered no when a talking hat offered him Slytherin, that had asked a headmaster to answer his own question before expecting an answer in return, and he kept it safe. Fawkes had fallen asleep on his lap again, radiating gentle heat, and the fire burned, and the first day of Harry Potter's real life went on quietly around him, full of possibility and complication and the specific bright weight of questions that finally had the room to form themselves. He stayed up later than everyone else. Not because he wasn't tired, he was extraordinarily tired, in the way of someone who has been carrying a weight they didn't know they were carrying, but because the castle was speaking to him in the quiet, in the settling of old stone and the whisper of dormant magic in the walls, and he had, for the first time, the equipment to listen. Eventually the fire burned low, and Fawkes made a small sleepy sound, and Harry carried him upstairs and set him on the bedpost with the care of someone handling something irreplaceable, and climbed into bed in a room full of first-year boys who were already asleep, and lay in the dark with his eyes open. The ceiling above his four-poster was different from the cupboard ceiling. The cupboard ceiling had been close and party-colored with water stains he'd memorized over years of looking at it. The Hogwarts ceiling was further away and entirely dark and felt, in the way of ceilings that have been over the right kind of rooms for a long time, like it was keeping watch. He didn't mind being watched. He had always been watched. The difference was that now he was watching back. Right, he said quietly, to no one, or possibly to the castle, or possibly to the version of himself that had just been handed to himself by a bird that had made a unilateral decision and set fire to everything in its way. Right. Let's see what's actually going on. Fawkes made another small sound from the bedpost. It might have been an agreement. Harry closed his eyes, and the castle breathed around him, and somewhere at the far end of the castle, in a room full of instruments that had been ticking steadily for 11 years, a small number of those instruments had gone quiet. And in his office, very late at night, Albus Dumbledore sat at his desk and looked at the silent instruments, and did not drink his tea, and thought about consequences. He thought about them for a very long time. Chapter 2, What the Mirror Doesn't Show. Harry woke up before everyone else. It wasn't intentional, he'd always been an early riser, years of Dursley household rhythms having made sleeping past 6 feel like trespassing, but this morning was different in the specific way that everything was different now. He lay still for a moment in the red-curtained four-poster and took inventory. The castle was already awake. Not in the human sense, the corridors were quiet, the other boys still breathing in the particular cadence of deep sleep, but in the way that old things are always awake, a low structural hum, a sense of the building knowing it was inhabited, magic settling into the day like a tide coming in. He could feel it across his skin like sunlight. Yesterday that sensation had been overwhelming. This morning it was just there, background and present, the way you feel a warm room when you've come in from cold. He got up quietly. Fawkes, on the bedpost, opened one eye, regarded him, and closed it again with the total disinterest of someone on a schedule Harry was not privy to. "Morning," Harry said, very quietly. The eye did not reopen. He dressed, pocketed his wand, which felt different in his hand this morning, not heavier or lighter but truer, like a tool being held by hands that finally had the grip strength for it, and went down to the common room. It was empty. The fire had been rebuilt at some point in the night by magic or a very early house elf and was already crackling contentedly. The portrait of the fat lady was asleep, her frame lit by morning light coming from somewhere that logically shouldn't have had a window. Harry sat in one of the armchairs nearest the fire and thought. He thought about Neville's word. Blocks. He thought about the way it had felt, that internal architecture, present for as long as he could remember and therefore never noticed, and tried to map it against his memories. Things he'd done by accident, the glass at the zoo, the incident on the school roof, his hair growing back overnight. Magic that had arrived without permission, the way water arrives through a cracked pipe, not a flood, just a leak, just enough to demonstrate that there was pressure behind it. What would it have been without the crack in the pipe? The fire made a comfortable noise. He thought about 11 years of leak and decided not to dwell on it yet. Anger was available to him, he could feel it sitting in a room further back in his chest, present and patient. He'd deal with it when he had more of the picture. The Dursleys had taught him, accidentally and through 11 years of object lessons, that acting on anger before you had the full picture only ever resulted in being put in the cupboard. He was not going back into any cupboard. The portrait door opened and Hermione came in from the girls' staircase already dressed, with her hair aggressively brushed and a copy of Hogwarts, a history tucked under one arm and the expression of someone who had been awake for a while and had things to say about it. She stopped when she saw him. Registered that he'd been sitting there quietly and alone. Made the rapid calculation of someone deciding whether to ask about it. "Morning," she said. "Morning." She sat across from him and opened the book to a page she'd already marked, which Harry noted she had done before coming downstairs, which meant she'd been doing research before she'd known he'd be here to share it with. He found this immensely reassuring. "I looked up magical suppression blocks," she said, without preamble. "In the index. There's not much, it's one of those topics that's in the book but not fully in the book, if you know what I mean. 2 paragraphs. Mostly it says they're extremely rare and heavily regulated and require ministry authorization. Neville said they don't always come from the ministry. No. Anyone with sufficient knowledge could theoretically construct one, but it would need to be keyed to the specific witch or wizard, you'd need a blood connection or direct magical contact, probably shortly after birth." She paused. "And it would need to be layered. Multiple blocks, built up over time, to keep pace with growing magical strength. Because you can't just put one block on an infant and expect it to hold when they're 11. The magic grows. The block has to grow with it." Harry was quiet for a moment. "So whoever did it would have needed ongoing access. Or they'd need to have been very, very good at forecasting growth," Hermione said. "Built them strong enough at the start that they'd scale automatically." She looked at him. "Which suggests someone who understood your magic specifically. Who knew what it was going to do." The fire cracked. Somewhere above them, a first year rolled over in their sleep. "Hermione," Harry said. "Who knew about me? Before last night, I mean. Who in the wizarding world knew who I was before I got here?" She opened her mouth and then closed it. Opened it again. "Everyone," she said slowly. "I mean, everyone knows the story. You know who, the prophecy, your parents, surviving the killing curse." She paused. "But specifically, who knew you as a person, as an infant?" "Dumbledore placed me with the Dursleys," Harry said. "I know that much. Hagrid told me yesterday, well, said it in passing. Said Dumbledore had decided it was best." He kept his voice level. "Which means Dumbledore knew where I was. For 11 years. Hermione held his gaze. "He's the greatest wizard alive," she said, carefully. "He defeated Grindelwald. He has enormous power and influence. If anyone could construct blocks sophisticated enough to scale with magical growth," she stopped herself. Yes, Harry said. The words sat between them like something with weight. Hermione closed the book. Then opened it again. Then closed it. We don't know for certain, she said finally, because she was Hermione and she was constitutionally incapable of landing on a conclusion without sufficient evidence even when the evidence was fairly suggestive. No, Harry agreed. We don't know yet. Yet, she said. Yet, he confirmed. They looked at each other, and something settled between them, not a friendship exactly, not yet, it was too new and too practical for that word, but the specific understanding of two people who have simultaneously recognized that they are each the kind of person the other one is, which is a foundation for something. Ron came down 20 minutes later with his hair at a structural angle, ate 4 biscuits from a tin on the common room table without apparent consciousness, and said, Quidditch tryouts aren't until spring, right, to no one in particular. Then he looked at Harry and Hermione sitting across from each other with books between them and said, You've been up for hours, haven't you, in the tone of someone who found this personally offensive. We were talking, Harry said. About what? Magical theory, Hermione said, which was technically accurate. Ron looked between them, decided this was beyond the scope of 6 in the morning, and took another biscuit. Classes started at 9. Harry's first transfiguration lesson was with Professor McGonagall, who arrived in the classroom as a tabby cat sitting on the teacher's desk, watched them all file in without any of them noticing, and then transformed back into herself without ceremony or announcement while they were still settling into their seats. Half the class jumped. Neville knocked over an inkwell. Transfiguration, McGonagall said, in the voice of someone who had been making this particular entrance for 30 years and found it just as satisfying every time, is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts. Anyone who does not take it seriously will leave. Is that clear? The class was very clear. She began with theory, the notes were precise, the delivery was crisp, and Harry found himself genuinely engaged in the way he was now genuinely engaged in everything, the way a lens focuses when it's properly adjusted. He took notes, and they were good notes, organized differently from the way he was apparently supposed to organize notes but better for it, and when McGonagall handed out matches and told them to turn the match into a needle, he looked at the match for a moment and felt the shape of the problem, and then tried. His match became a needle on the 3rd attempt, which McGonagall told him was excellent for a first lesson, and she said it with the particular care of a teacher complimenting work while privately recalibrating her expectations upward, and Harry wondered if she'd been expecting him to struggle, and why, and what picture she'd had of him before last night. After class, as the others filed out, she said, Potter, a moment. He waited. She waited for the others to leave. How are you finding things? She asked. And the question was ordinary on the surface but beneath it was something more direct, the genuine inquiry of a woman who was asking because she needed to know. Interesting, he said honestly. Brighter. More textured. He considered. Like I had cataracts I didn't know about and someone took them off. She looked at him steadily. And are you experiencing any discomfort? Magical overload, headaches, difficulty concentrating? No. He paused. Should I be? Releasing a significant magical suppression all at once can be difficult. There are recorded cases of witches or wizards experiencing something like an electrical overload when blocks are suddenly removed. You're confirming they were blocks, Harry said. She held his gaze without flinching. She had decided, he thought, something about how to handle this, and that decision was visible in the set of her expression. I'm confirming my suspicion, which I have not yet had the opportunity to investigate fully. But you know they were blocks. Potter. Professor. Were there blocks on my magic? A pause. Brief. Professional. The pause of a woman who had served this institution for decades and whose loyalty to it was genuine and deep, standing at the edge of something that made that loyalty complicated. Yes, she said. I believe so. The word landed the way things land when you already knew them but needed to hear them from someone else to make them real. Thank you, Harry said. I want you to know, she said, and her voice had shifted slightly, still professional, but warmer, with the warmth of something personal pressing against the professional surface, that I intend to get to the bottom of this. Whatever its source and whatever its purpose. So do I, Harry said. He left for Charms. Professor Flitwick was small, enthusiastic, and so pleased about the concept of magic that Harry found himself smiling in his class without deciding to, which he noted as an achievement of teaching. They worked on basic wand movements and Harry was attentive and careful and produced slightly better results than the lesson required without making a production of it. Hermione produced dramatically better results than the lesson required and did make a slight production of it, and Flitwick gave her 10 points with the expression of a man who wanted to give her 20 but was calibrating for first week. In between Charms and lunch, walking back through the third-floor corridor because the moving staircases had delivered them to the wrong level, Harry stopped. Hermione and Ron, deep in an argument about the best wand movement for the softening charm, kept walking for 3 steps before they noticed. The door at the end of the corridor was an ordinary castle door. Old, iron-banded, settled into its frame with the particular solidness of something that had been there a very long time. There was nothing remarkable about it except that it was a door in a corridor they'd been told not to come to, and the magic coming from behind it was remarkable in a way that Harry was fairly certain he was the only person in the hall currently able to notice. It was layered. Dense. Not just one charm or one ward, many, stacked and interlocking, built with the care of someone who took their work seriously. He could feel them the way you feel the difference between a wall and a door, even when both looked the same from the outside. Something was behind that magic that was worth all that effort. Harry? Ron said, coming back to stand beside him. There's something behind that door, Harry said. Ron looked at the door. Then at Harry. Yeah, that's why they told us not to come up here. No, I mean, there's something specifically. Something being guarded. He studied the door without touching it. Whatever it is, it's important enough to have approximately 8 layers of protective enchantment on it that I can feel from here. Hermione looked at the door, and at Harry, and back at the door. She was doing the calculation again, the rapid Hermione arithmetic that processed facts toward conclusions. You can sense spells from a distance. I can sense this one, he said. It's strong enough. He paused. Also there's a living thing behind there. Something large. He cocked his head. It smells. Ron took a substantial step backward. Right. Well. Wonderful. Lunch? They went to lunch. Harry ate and thought about the door, and the spells, and Dumbledore, and the way Dumbledore had said the third-floor corridor was dangerous with the specific emphasis of someone trying to make a thing sound more random and accidental than it was. Forbidden corridors were supposed to be spaces where unsafe magic had created hazards over centuries of a living castle. They were not supposed to be spaces that smelled of something alive and were wrapped in deliberate, recent enchantment. Someone had put something there on purpose. Recently. He looked across the great hall at the teacher's table and found Dumbledore calmly eating soup, and thought, with a clarity that surprised him with its steadiness, you put it there. After lunch came defense against the dark arts, which meant Quirrell. The classroom smelled powerfully of garlic. Quirrell himself was, Harry had to be honest about this, a strange teaching presence. He stuttered. He wore a purple turban that he said had been given to him by an African prince as thanks for ridding him of a troublesome zombie, which Ron whispered was almost certainly a lie. He was enthusiastic in a slightly performative way about minor dark creatures and discussed them in the tone of someone who had been advised to appear nervous and had not quite mastered the performance. Harry sat in the second row and paid close attention. The magic coming from Quirrell was wrong. Not in a technical sense. His spells, when demonstrated, worked fine. But the magic itself had a character to it, a texture, that didn't match the man. It was like watching someone wear clothes that didn't fit, the shape was correct from a distance but up close the proportions were off. The magical signature Harry could feel from him was double-layered, 2 distinct patterns overlapping, one sitting on top of the other like a shadow that had been cast from the wrong direction. He said nothing about this in class. He took his notes, answered 2 questions, and let the lesson proceed. On the way out, in the corridor, Quirrell said, "A moment, Mr. Potter," and Harry turned and looked at him and waited while the rest of the class filed past. Quirrell smiled at him. It was a pleasant smile with nothing behind it except intelligence wearing the mask of pleasantness. "I just wanted to say," Quirrell said, "how very pleased we are to have you at Hogwarts. You must find it all quite overwhelming." "Not particularly," Harry said. "And no." The stutter was consistent, Harry noticed. Too consistent. Real stutters have pattern variation, moments where stress increases the stammer or comfort decreases it. This one was uniform. It was a practice stutter. "After last night's excitement with Professor Dumbledore's Phoenix, I'd have thought, Fawkes isn't Professor Dumbledore's anymore," Harry said pleasantly. "He chose someone else." Quirrell's smile did not change. His eyes did, a very small movement, a focusing, like a lens adjusting, and the something underneath the surface of him was suddenly more present, more awake, pressing against the Quirrell-shaped container with slightly more pressure. Quite," Quirrell said. "Was there something specific you wanted?" Harry asked. "Still pleasant. Still easy." No. Just welcoming you." The smile again. "Do let me know if you need anything. My door is always open." "That's very kind," Harry said. He held Quirrell's gaze for 1 beat longer than was socially strictly necessary, not a challenge, just a clarity, and then nodded and walked away. In the corridor outside, Ron was waiting with the particular expression of someone who had been watching through the glass panel in the door. "What was that about?" "He wanted to know if I found things overwhelming," Harry said. "Do you?" "No." Ron considered this. "D'you reckon he's always that weird?" "I think," Harry said, "that he's considerably more than weird." He glanced back at the classroom door. "I'll tell you later." With Hermione. That evening, in the common room, with the fire going and most of the older students gone to the library or their dormitories, Harry told them both about the double magical signature. Hermione said, 2 magical signatures occupying the same person. "Yes. That's possession," she said flatly. "Magical possession. One spirit or entity inhabiting a living person. She stopped. Processed. It's extraordinarily difficult to do and maintain. The host would have to be willing or subdued. The possessing entity would need," she stopped again. "Hermione," Ron said carefully. "You look like you've worked something out and you hate it." "What's behind the door on the 3rd floor?" she said, ignoring him. "Something guarded," Harry said. "Something alive, and something very specifically valuable. Last year," Hermione said, "there was a break-in at Gringotts. It was in the newspaper. Vault 713. The goblins said nothing was taken but," she pressed her hands together on her knees. "If you had something extraordinarily valuable that someone powerful was trying to steal, and you needed to move it somewhere safer, and you were the headmaster of the safest school in Britain, you'd put it at Hogwarts," Harry said. "In a guarded corridor," Ron said, catching up. "With an illegal warning sign." He looked between them. "And you reckon the person trying to steal it is, the thing sharing Quirrell's body has the same," Harry searched for the right word. "The same feeling as the magic scar on my forehead." He touched it without thinking. "I've always been able to feel it. I just didn't know what I was feeling before yesterday. There's something in it. Something that belongs to whatever is in Quirrell." The fire was very quiet. Ron stared at him. "You're saying you know who is, he's in Quirrell, he's here, in the school, and he's after whatever's on the 3rd floor." "I think so," Harry said. "Right," Ron said. He swallowed. "Right. Great. Brilliant. And you're telling us this like it's fine." "It's not fine," Harry said. "But it's not a surprise either. He was always going to come back. The prophecy says so." He's not gone, just, incomplete. He paused. What I want to know is what he's after. What's in that vault? And what Dumbledore is actually doing about it. Presumably Dumbledore knows, Hermione said. Presumably, Harry agreed. Which means Dumbledore brought something of enormous value to this school, knowing that a fragment of the most dangerous dark wizard in living memory was possibly inside one of his own teachers, and put it under the third-floor corridor with some protective enchantments and a note to first years saying don't go there. He paused. Why would you do that? Hermione was quiet. Unless, Harry said slowly, the thing on the third floor isn't just being protected from Voldemort. It's bait. The word sat in the air. Bait for what? Ron asked. Harry looked at the fire. I'm not sure yet. But I think I'm part of whatever the answer is. He said it without self-pity and without drama. Just the steady acknowledgement of a thing he was beginning to understand about his own story, that it had been written by people who had a specific ending in mind and had been arranging the chapters accordingly. Before either of them could respond, the portrait hole swung open and the Weasley twins tumbled in with the energy of people who had been somewhere they shouldn't have been and thoroughly enjoyed it, followed by a slightly more dignified Lee Jordan, and the common room expanded back into ordinary first-week noise, and Harry let it, because he'd said enough for one night and the rest of it needed more information before it was worth saying. The next morning, Dumbledore sent him an invitation. It was delivered at breakfast by a school owl, not Fawkes, who was still in hatchling form and perched on Harry's shoulder looking like an aggressively pink pom-pom, and it was written in the distinctive hand of a man who chose his words with the precision of someone who knew the weight of them. Dear Harry, I wonder if you might spare me some time this afternoon. My door is always open, though I do prefer the company of someone who chooses to walk through it. ADPS. I notice Fawkes has made himself quite at home with you. I'm not entirely sure whether to be jealous. Harry read it twice. The postscript was genuine, he thought, there was humor in it that wasn't performed. The rest of it was very careful. What's it say? Ron asked, mouth full of toast. Dumbledore wants to see me. Ron and Hermione exchanged a look. I'll go, Harry said, folding the letter. I want to talk to him anyway. Be careful, Hermione said. I'm always careful. You asked the headmaster to answer his own question on your first night, she said. That's not careful, that's effective, Harry said. She considered this. Effective, she allowed. Dumbledore's office was at the top of a spiral staircase behind a gargoyle that leapt aside when Harry said, Sherbet Lemon, the password helpfully included at the bottom of the letter, a small courtesy that was also, Harry recognized, a small signal of openness. The office itself was everything the man suggested it would be, circular, lined with portraits of sleeping headmasters, full of delicate silver instruments on spindle-legged tables that ticked and whirred and emitted the occasional puff of smoke, and behind the largest desk Harry had ever seen, in a large chair that nonetheless seemed sized for a man comfortable taking up space, Albus Dumbledore. Fawkes, on Harry's shoulder, made a small sound when they came in. It was not a welcoming sound. It was the sound of something that had made a considered decision and was not currently reconsidering it. Harry, Dumbledore said, rising slightly from his chair in a courtesy that Harry recognized as genuine. Thank you for coming. Please, sit. Harry sat. He kept his posture easy, his hands in his lap, Fawkes warm against the side of his neck. He waited. Dumbledore settled back into his chair and looked at him with those bright blue eyes that were doing real seeing now, not the performed wonder of the feast. Just looking. I owe you, the old man said, a conversation. I have been trying to decide since last night exactly how to have it. Honestly, Harry suggested. I prefer that approach myself, Dumbledore said. He said it without irony, but there was a self-aware quality in his voice, a man making a quiet note of the gap between preference and practice. Let me begin with something true, Fawkes has never, in 60 years, made a decision I didn't approve of. Until 2 nights ago. What does that tell you? Harry asked. That he saw something I was, Dumbledore chose his word carefully, choosing not to see. The blocks, Harry said. No pause this time. Just a slight settling, the exhale of a man choosing honesty after deciding the alternative no longer served. Yes. You put them there. Yes. The fire in the headmaster's grate was different from the common room fire, older, more settled, burning with the particular steadiness of a fire that had been burning in the same place for generations. Harry looked at it for a moment and then back at the old man. Why? Dumbledore was quiet for long enough that it wasn't deflection, it was thought. Real thought, the kind that's visible in the temporary vacancy of a face actually working on a problem rather than preparing a response. Because I was afraid of what you would be, he said at last. The honesty of it was, Harry had to admit, unexpected. He'd expected elaboration and justification. Not that. Tell me, Harry said. And Dumbledore told him. Not everything. Harry understood even as it was happening that the full architecture of the plan was not going to be laid out in one afternoon, that there were pieces the old man was still holding, still weighing, but enough. The prophecy. The nature of Voldemort's first defeat. The question of what lived in Harry's scar. The understanding that Harry was not simply a survivor of a murder attempt but a piece of something larger and more complicated, and that a piece who was too powerful too early might not behave like a piece at all. Might become something the plan couldn't account for. You were managing me, Harry said. He said it plainly, the way you state a thing you've known for a while and finally have confirmed. You put blocks on my magic so that I would arrive here at 11 years old, inexperienced, overwhelmed, dependent, and, he paused. Manageable. I told myself it was protective, Dumbledore said. I told myself a child with the full force of your power, growing up in the non-magical world with no guidance and no training, would be a danger to himself and others. And the other part of it? Harry said. The part that wasn't about protecting me? Dumbledore met his eyes. And for a moment, just a moment, behind the blue, behind the careful management, Harry saw a very old man who had been building something for half a century and had believed so completely in the necessity of it that he had stopped, at some point, distinguishing between the thing and the person at the center of it. I needed you to need me, Dumbledore said quietly. I needed you to arrive here small enough that I could guide you. If I was going to save as many people as possible, I needed to be certain you would follow the path I'd built. The fire cracked. Instead, Harry said, I arrived here and Fawkes set fire to your architecture. In a manner of speaking. What was the plan? Harry asked. The full plan. Start to finish. Dumbledore was quiet. I'm going to find out, Harry said. Not a threat. Just a truth. I'm 11, not unintelligent. I have good friends and access to a very large library. I'll find it. The only question is whether you tell me directly or I piece it together from the edges. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. Not calculating, at least, not only that. There was something else in it that was closer to the kind of look a person gives when they are realizing, later than they should have, that the person in front of them is actually a person. You remind me of someone, he said softly. My father? No. A small pause. Yourself. The self you might have been, if I'd been wiser and braver 30 years ago. He folded his hands. What I will tell you is this, the path I planned leads to a confrontation with Voldemort that, in my estimation, cost something very significant. I am not yet certain how to lead you down that path now that you are, changed. I need time to think. You don't have to lead me anywhere, Harry said. But I'm going to stop Voldemort. Not because you built a plan around it. Because he murdered my parents and is going to keep murdering people and someone has to. He stood up. I'd prefer if you helped. I'd prefer honesty to strategy. But I'm not waiting for permission, Professor. He was 11 years old. He was standing in the most powerful wizard in Britain's office, telling him how things were going to be, and there was not an ounce of performance in it. Just clarity. Just a person who had had 11 years of diminishment and was now, simply, not diminished. Dumbledore said nothing for a moment. Then something happened in his face that was quiet and complicated, not defeat, not quite admiration, something older than both, something that might have been the sensation of a plan recognizing its own edges. "Very well," he said. "One more thing," Harry said, turning back at the door. "The thing on the 3rd floor. The thing from Gringotts Vault 713. What is it?" Dumbledore looked at him. "And Quirrell," Harry continued. "You know what's living in him." The silence that followed was different from the previous silences. Thicker. Older. "The Philosopher's Stone," Dumbledore said at last. "And yes. I know about Quirrell." "Then you know it's going to move," Harry said. "Whatever's in Quirrell, it's been here for weeks, gathering itself. It's going to act. Soon." He paused, hand on the door. "I'll be ready when it does. It would be useful if you were too." He left. The spiral staircase moved him down and deposited him in the corridor, and the gargoyle shifted back, and Harry walked back toward Gryffindor Tower with Fawkes on his shoulder making small contented noises in the late afternoon light. Behind him, in the circular office, the instruments on the spindle-legged tables ticked and whirred and produced their small puffs of smoke. Several of them had been silent since the feast 2 nights ago. Dumbledore sat at his desk and looked at them, and thought about a plan he had spent 51 years building, and the 11-year-old who had just walked into his office and spoken to him like an equal, and the Phoenix who had made a unilateral decision that had changed everything. He thought about Lily Potter. About the letter he'd left with her son 11 years ago, on a doorstep, in November. About all the things he had decided for that child without asking. He thought, perhaps Fawkes was right. It was the most honest thought he'd had in a very long time. Outside, on the castle grounds, the afternoon light was long and golden, and Harry walked back to the tower thinking, and Fawkes rode his shoulder with the contentment of something that had done exactly what it came to do and intended to continue doing it, and above them both, the castle stood and kept its watch, and the year was only just beginning. Chapter 3, The architecture of the library at Hogwarts was the kind of place that rewarded patience, and Harry had learned patience the way most people learn languages, through sustained, involuntary immersion. He'd spent more hours than he could count in the Dursley's smallest spaces, learning to be very quiet and very observant, and those same skills now made him an unusually effective researcher. Hermione, sitting across from him at the table they'd claimed near the window with the view of the grounds, was a more naturally gifted researcher than Harry but worked differently. She moved through sources like a net through water, catching everything and sorting it later. Harry moved more like a needle, following one thread at a time, going deep instead of wide. They'd been at it since 7 on Saturday morning, 5 days into term, while Ron played exploding Snap with Neville at the other end of the table and maintained plausible deniability about what they were doing, on the grounds that if McGonagall walked through he could honestly say he hadn't been reading anything. "Here," Hermione said, without looking up. She slid a book across the table. Obscured Magics and Their Detection, A Practical Survey, 3rd edition, open to Chapter 14. Retrograde Suppression Chaining. It's the method where blocks are built to scale with the subject's magical growth. Harry read the passage. It was dense, the way texts written by people who know a great deal about something become dense when they're trying to explain it to people who know less, full of terms that referred to other terms, like following a path that kept forking. But the central principle was clear enough. A retrograde suppression chain was a series of linked blocks, each calibrated to activate at a specific threshold of magical growth, each passing control to the next block as the previous one became insufficient. The result was a seamless, continuously effective suppression that aged with the subject. The text noted that it was extraordinarily complex to construct. It noted that it required the constructor to have detailed foreknowledge of the subject's magical potential. It noted, in the dry tone of a text that was trying not to make moral judgments while visibly making moral judgments, that it was classified as a Class 3 magical interference with a person's autonomy, illegal without ministry oversight, and that documented cases of its misuse had resulted in significant and lasting magical impairment in subjects. Significant and lasting impairment, Harry said. In cases where the blocks were maintained past maturity, Hermione said quickly. If removed at the appropriate time, which Fawkes essentially ensured, the research suggests full recovery. Your magic isn't impaired, it was just compressed. She paused. You're fine, Harry. I know, he said. Not dismissive, genuine. I can feel that I'm fine. I was more interested in the legal aspect. She nodded. Class 3. Which means anyone who applied it without ministry authorization committed a criminal offense under the Magical Interference Act of 1947. Harry set the book down carefully and looked out the window. On the grounds, someone was flying a broomstick badly and getting progressively lower and more desperate about it. The sky was overcast, the kind of flat gray that turned the grounds the color of an old photograph. So, Ron said, from the other end of the table, pretending he hadn't been listening while having very obviously been listening. Dumbledore broke the law. We don't have documentary proof yet, Hermione said. But he told Harry he did it, Ron said. In his office. Straight up. A verbal admission isn't, Hermione, Harry said. She stopped. I'm not trying to arrest him, Harry said. I'm trying to understand what was done, why it was done, and what it means for what's going to happen next. Legal classification is useful context, not the point. She relaxed slightly. Right. Yes. Sorry. The question I want to answer, Harry continued, is whether the blocks were the whole of it or just part of something larger. He called it a plan. He said it was 51 years in the making. He looked at Hermione. He's 70-something years old. 51 years ago he was roughly in his 20s. What was happening in the wizarding world 51 years ago? Hermione was already reaching for a different book before he finished the sentence. She found what she was looking for in a history text, a dense, slightly self-congratulatory history of the Ministry of Magic that had clearly been written by someone who worked for the ministry, in a section covering the mid-20th century. In the late 1930s and early 1940s, the text noted, a young wizard of exceptional ability named Tom Marvolo Riddle had attended Hogwarts. Had been, by all accounts, remarkable. Had graduated with the highest marks of his generation. Had then, according to records that became increasingly sparse and contradictory, disappeared into obscurity for approximately a decade before beginning the rise that would eventually make the name Voldemort the thing you didn't say aloud. In the same period, a young Transfiguration professor named Albus Dumbledore had been at Hogwarts. Had, according to the same text, been one of the few people to openly distrust the talented Riddle. He knew, Harry said. Not when it would happen, not exactly how, but he knew, 51 years ago, that Tom Riddle was going to become something dangerous. And he spent the next 5 decades building a response. The prophecy came later, Hermione said. He wouldn't have known about you until 1980, Harry said. The year before I was born. But the foundation of whatever he was building, the network, the Order of the Phoenix, the understanding of Voldemort's magic, all of it, that was 50 years of work. The prophecy just told him who the final piece was going to be. He paused. Me. Neville had gone very still at the other end of the table. Harry glanced at him. You knew about the prophecy. Neville looked at the table. My gran mentioned it. Apparently there were 2 children it might have referred to. Me and you. He swallowed. Voldemort chose you. I know, Harry said gently. And we should talk about that properly, sometime, because I think it matters. But for now, he looked back at his notes. For now I'm trying to understand the shape of what Dumbledore was building. What he'd pieced together, across 5 days of classes and 2 days of library work, arranged itself clearly when he looked at it as a whole, a plan built on the prophecy, on Harry's survival of the killing curse, on the understanding that Voldemort would return, and on the deliberate engineering of Harry's development to ensure that when the confrontation came, it came in the way Dumbledore had determined it needed to come. Small. Unaware. Guided. The blocks weren't protection. They were architecture. Keep Harry manageable. Keep him dependent. Keep him arriving at each piece of the truth only when Dumbledore was ready to deliver it, in the form Dumbledore had decided, at the pace Dumbledore had chosen. "There's something else," Hermione said. She'd been quiet for several minutes in the way that meant she'd found something she wasn't sure how to say. In this section here, she turned a page in a different text, one Harry hadn't looked at yet, a slim volume bound in dark green leather that she'd pulled from the restricted section using the note from Flitwick that she'd obtained for entirely legitimate purposes and then immediately used for her own research agenda. This is about sacrificial magic. Old magic. The kind that predates most of what we'd recognize as formal spellwork. Harry read where she was pointing. The passage was about love as a magical force, not the emotional experience of love but the magical residue it left. The way certain acts of profound self-sacrifice, particularly the sacrifice of a parent for a child, could leave a protective enchantment so deep that it functioned almost like a ward. Ancient magic. Magic that had been studied and documented but never fully replicated, because it required an authentic and total act and therefore couldn't be performed on purpose. "Your mum," Hermione said softly. "When she died for you." "Yes," Harry said. He held the page carefully, like it was something that deserved to be held carefully. "The protection she left would explain why the killing curse didn't kill you." "But," Hermione touched the page, just under a particular paragraph. "It says the protection is skin deep. Maintained by proximity to the place where the sacrifice was made, or by proximity to blood relatives who carry the memory of it." "The Dursleys," Harry said. "That's why Dumbledore put you with them," Ron said. He sounded, for the first time in the conversation, less like someone following the argument and more like someone who had landed on something that genuinely troubled him. "Not just to hide you. To maintain the protection." "Yes," Harry said. "Which is, it makes sense. As magic. It's even genuinely protective, not entirely cynical." He paused. "But it also means he had a reason to keep me with them that was separate from my welfare. A reason to keep me in exactly that household regardless of what my life there was like." The window showed the overcast grounds. The bad flyer had landed. "Did you?" Ron started, then stopped. "Was it bad there?" Harry said, reading where he was going. "Not, I don't want to make it dramatic. They didn't feed me well and I lived in a cupboard for the first 10 years and the cousin was a consistent problem. It was fine. I'm fine." He said this in the precise tone of someone who means it and also means something more complicated underneath it that they are not currently going to address. But it wouldn't have had to be like that. He knew where I was. He could have checked. He picked up his quill and wrote something in his notes, not words, just a small structure, boxes and lines, the shape of a plan, the shape of a person at the center of a plan without being asked. Then he put the quill down and looked at Hermione and Ron. "I want to find the formal record," he said. "I want to see Dumbledore's name on something. Not because I need the evidence to confront him, he's already admitted it, but because I want to understand the full shape of it. And because I think," he said slowly, "that there are other people in this building who deserve to know." Hermione understood immediately. "McGonagall. She served under him for decades," Harry said. "She's the deputy headmistress. She is, by any reasonable standard, a woman of integrity who has given her professional life to this institution." He paused. "Does she know all of it?" "I don't think so," Hermione said quietly. The way she looked at the feast, that wasn't the face of someone who knew and was complicit. That was the face of someone seeing something she hadn't been shown. Then she deserves to see it, Harry said. Finding the formal record proved harder than finding the principal. The library's magical governance section had plenty about suppression magic in theory and nothing about specific cases, which was either because such cases were rare or because the records were kept somewhere that wasn't accessible to first-year students in the main collection. It was Neville who solved the problem, with the specific kind of lateral thinking that appeared occasionally in people who had learned to navigate difficult situations quietly and had therefore developed unusually good maps of where things were kept that weren't meant to be found. The headmaster's records, Neville said. Not Dumbledore's personal records, the institutional ones. Decisions made in the official capacity of headmaster, logged with the ministry as required by the Hogwarts Charter of 1473, are accessible to anyone with a direct personal interest in them. He paused. You have a direct personal interest. Harry looked at him. My Gran's a school governor, Neville said, a little defensively. She talks about governance a lot. At dinner. For extended periods of time. Neville, Harry said, you are significantly more useful than people seem to think. Neville looked momentarily like someone had handed him something he wasn't sure how to hold. Then he straightened slightly, and somewhere inside him, a fraction of the accumulated weight of 10 years of being told he was insufficient shifted. They went to the headmaster's records at 4 in the afternoon on a Saturday, with Madame Pants watching them with the specific vigilance of a librarian who suspected intent. The records were kept in the library's administrative annex, behind a small door that was not locked because it didn't need to be locked. The records were public by charter, and most people simply didn't know to look. The section relevant to Harry took 20 minutes to find and approximately 3 minutes to read. It was a formal notification to the ministry, dated November 1, 1981, the day after Harry's parents had died. In Dumbledore's handwriting, in the careful language of official documentation, notification of the placement of a temporary magical management protocol on a minor, H.J. Potter, Dilby July 31, 1980, necessitated by extraordinary circumstances relating to the child's exposure to dark arts magic and the potential for uncontrolled magical discharge presenting a risk to the minor and his guardians. Countersigned by the Minister for Magic at the time, a man named Millicent Bagnold, and filed under Ministry Reference 4471/classified. Classified, Hermione said. Until the subject reaches majority, Harry said, reading the footnote. Which means I wouldn't have been shown this until I was 17. 6 more years, Ron said grimly. Harry looked at the notification for a long time. Not at the words, he'd absorbed those in the first reading, but at the shape of it. The bureaucratic neatness. The way it had been logged and countersigned and filed, a decision about the life of an infant treated with the same administrative tidiness as a building permit. The way the language worked hard to sound reasonable and protective and said absolutely nothing about who had decided what was best or why or whether anyone had asked. Temporary, he said. What? It says temporary management protocol. He pointed. But it wasn't removed at 11, when I started Hogwarts and training began, which is what the research says should happen with legitimate ministry-authorized blocks. He looked at Hermione. If it was temporary and logged with the ministry, there should be a follow-up notification of removal. Filed when I was 11. Hermione was already scanning the adjacent files. There was no follow-up notification. He filed the paperwork to put them on, Harry said. He never filed the paperwork to take them off. Ron exhaled slowly. Because he didn't take them off. Because he didn't take them off, Harry confirmed. He closed the folder carefully and set it back in its proper place, because Madame Pants was watching and because some habits of neatness are good regardless of circumstance. Right. I need to talk to McGonagall. He found her at 6 o'clock, in the corridor outside the Transfiguration classroom, where she was walking back from an apparently unproductive meeting based on the set of her jaw. She was in her tartan robes and she was carrying a stack of second-year essays and she looked, as she always looked, precisely like a woman who had very high standards and was unsurprised to find the world falling short of them. Mr. Potter, she said, not breaking stride. If this is about the broom situation with your yearmates, it's not, Harry said, falling into step beside her. "I need to show you something." She slowed. Read his face with the rapidness of a teacher who had 40 years of reading students. "How serious?" "Quite serious," he said. She stopped walking. The corridor was empty. "Show me." He showed her the copy he'd made. Hermione had brought parchment, because of course she had, and stood quietly while McGonagall read it. She read it the first time quickly, the way you read something when you're hoping to discover it's less bad than it looked at first glance. Then she read it again more slowly, and the expression on her face during the second reading was something that Harry felt the weight of in his chest even from where he was standing. He had seen adults absorb bad news before. It was one of the things you became fluent in, growing up the way he had, and he recognized this as being in the category of things that are difficult not because they are surprising but because they confirm a suspicion the person had been carrying and hoping was wrong. "The removal notification," she said, when she'd finished. "Not filed," Harry said. She looked at the parchment for another moment. Then she folded it with the sharp, precise movements of someone channeling something large into something small, and held it at her side, and looked at the castle wall as though the stones had done something personally disappointing. "I knew some of it," she said. Her voice was very controlled. "Not the specifics. I knew there was a plan, and I knew you were central to it. I told myself that Albus was, that he was protecting you. That his judgment was." She stopped herself. The control slipped for a moment and underneath it was something old and genuine, the particular anger of someone who has given their trust fully and found it was not fully deserved. "I should have asked more questions." "You're asking them now," Harry said. She looked at him. The sharpness of her expression softened in a way that was barely visible but present. "You are remarkably composed for someone who has just discovered their entire childhood was a managed variable." "I've been composing myself since I was about 4, Harry said. "I've had practice." She was quiet for a moment. "What do you need from me?" she said at last. And the question was direct and unguarded in the way of someone who has decided that their loyalty is going to a person and not a plan. "I need to know what you know about what's in the third-floor corridor," Harry said. "And I need someone in this building who is going to be honest with me when I ask direct questions. Not strategic. Not managed. Honest." "The stone," she said immediately. "The Philosopher's Stone. Nicholas Flamel's. Dumbledore arranged for it to be brought here from Gringotts when intelligence suggested someone was attempting to steal it." "Quirrell," Harry said. She looked at him sharply. "What do you know about Quirrell?" "2 magical signatures," Harry said. "I can feel them from across a room. Whatever's sharing his body, it's the same thing that left a scar on my head when I was 1 year old." McGonagall went very still. "He's in the school," Harry said. "He's been here since September. He's been waiting, gathering strength, looking for a way to the stone. Albus knows this." Her voice had an edge to it now. "Yes," Harry said. "We discussed it. He said he was aware. And she stopped. Her jaw tightened. "He built a series of enchanted obstacles. Traps, essentially. He told me they were meant to deter a would-be thief. He didn't tell me the would-be thief was inside one of our colleagues." The edge in her voice had become something colder and more precise. "He let that man continue teaching. He's using the stone as bait," Harry said. "I think Voldemort going after it is part of the plan. I think the plan involves him getting into the chamber below the 3rd floor and being confronted there. By me." He paused. "Probably by a version of me that was supposed to be smaller, and less informed, and more malleable, and driven by desperation and ignorance rather than choice." McGonagall looked at him for a long time. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to be ready," Harry said. "On my terms. When the time comes." He paused. "But first I think you should have a conversation with Professor Dumbledore." "I fully intend to," she said, and her voice in that moment was not the voice of a deputy headmistress managing an institutional problem. It was the voice of a woman who had spent 40 years believing the best of someone and had just been shown, in ministry certified, officially countersigned black and white, that she had been managed while she was believing. She would be magnificent about it, Harry thought. She was one of those people who became most formidable not when they were angry, but in the particular moment when they decided to be. She took the parchment and walked toward the spiral staircase. Harry walked the other way, back toward Gryffindor Tower, and thought. The stone. Quirrell. The traps below the third floor. Dumbledore's plan, which had required a small, uninformed, dependent Harry arriving at the chamber in some desperate final act confrontation, probably at the end of the year, probably at a moment of maximum crisis when the only possible move was the move the plan had prepared for. The plan had assumed ignorance. It had assumed a Harry who didn't know about the stone until the trap had already been sprung, who would blunder through the obstacles by necessity, who would face Voldemort on the back foot and survive, maybe, by virtue of the love magic in his skin and whatever residual sacrifice Dumbledore had presumably been building toward. But Harry knew about the stone now. He knew about Quirrell. He knew about the obstacles. He had 3 months of the school year still ahead of him and he had, for the first time, everything he needed to be ready. He reached the portrait hole and stopped. Fawkes, who had been absent all day in the manner of a phoenix who had other business, was perched on the corridor torch bracket beside the fat lady, radiating warmth, still pink and somewhat undignified but growing by the day. He regarded Harry with those bright eyes. "You knew all of this was going to happen," Harry said to him. "Didn't you?" Fawkes made a small sound that was not confirmation and not denial and was approximately the sound of something that understood the concept of in good time very deeply. "Right," Harry said. The portrait swung open. Ron and Hermione were visible inside, waiting, with the deliberately casual body language of people who were not waiting at all. Neville was there too, and had brought biscuits, which Harry thought was the kind of practical emotional intelligence that got undervalued in people who were also good at other things. Harry climbed through. "McGonagall's going to talk to Dumbledore," he said, sitting down by the fire. "Good," Hermione said. "What happens when she does?" "Something shifts," Harry said. "He's been operating on the assumption that everything is still going to plan. When she walks in there with those papers," he picked up a biscuit. "He's going to have to recalibrate. Again. He won't be happy," Ron said. "I'm not trying to make him happy," Harry said. "I'm trying to change what the plan requires of me." "And what does it currently require?" Hermione asked carefully. She had the expression of someone who had already worked out the answer and wanted to hear it said aloud so that it was real and not just a conclusion she'd reached alone. Harry was quiet for a moment. "I think," he said, "that the original plan required me to die." The fire was quiet. Outside, the Scottish wind hit the tower windows and the castle shifted subtly around them, the way old buildings settle, the way things that have been standing for a very long time make room for what's happening inside them. Ron opened his mouth. Closed it. "Not permanently," Harry said. "Or, I don't think permanently. I think the protection my mother left works in both directions. But there's something in my scar that shouldn't be there. Something Voldemort left behind when the curse rebounded. And I think Dumbledore always knew that something would need to happen to it." He touched his scar. "I think the plan involved me facing Voldemort at a moment where the thing in my scar, whatever it is, could be removed. And I think the method of removal was probably going to involve something I wouldn't have agreed to if I'd known what it was." The biscuit sat untouched on the table. "That's," Ron said, carefully, "a lot." "Yes," Harry agreed. "Are you?" Ron started, and started again, and this time his voice had dropped the casual surface of it and was just Ron, direct and warm and a bit frightened. "Are you all right, mate?" "Yes," Harry said. And it was still true. Still the same steadiness that had been there since the feast, since Fawkes, since the moment the walls came down and everything came into focus. He was not all right in the sense of being unaffected. He was all right in the sense of being fully present in an uncomfortable truth rather than partially present in a comfortable lie, and he had learned, early, that the first was always better. "I'm not going to let it happen the way it was planned," he said. "I'm not going to sleepwalk into a confrontation designed to spend me like currency. I'm going to find out what's in my scar. I'm going to deal with it on my terms." He looked at them. "With help?" "Obviously," Hermione said, as though this had never been in question. "Absolutely," Ron said, with the quiet conviction of someone who'd made his decision the moment Harry walked back into the common room after the feast and had simply been waiting for the moment when it needed saying. Neville said nothing, but he pushed the biscuit slightly closer to Harry, which was its own kind of answer. Outside, in the corridor leading to the spiral staircase, McGonagall was walking toward Dumbledore's office with the parchment in her hand and the expression of someone about to have a necessary conversation they should have had a great deal sooner. Inside the gargoyle staircase, inside the circular office, instruments ticked. Some had gone silent. Others, newer ones, had started up, measuring something different, tracking a different set of variables than the ones they'd been built for. One of them, a small, spinning device near the back of the desk, silver and delicate, that had been spinning steadily for 11 years in one direction, had, in the last 5 days, begun spinning in the other. Dumbledore noticed it every time he sat at his desk. He'd built that instrument to track his plan's trajectory. The direction of spin indicated whether events were moving toward the intended outcome. It was spinning the wrong way. He was finding, entirely unhappy about it. Chapter 4, The Man Behind the Mirror. November arrived the way Scottish Novembers do, not gradually, but all at once, like someone had simply decided that autumn was finished and cold was the new arrangement. The grounds went grey and frost-sharp overnight, the lake acquired a skin of ice at its edges each morning that melted by noon, and the castle corridors developed the specific drafts that only occur when a building is very old and very large and the wind has had centuries to learn all the gaps. Harry barely noticed the cold. He'd spent October the way a person spends time when they've been given a new instrument and are learning its full range, methodically, without rushing, paying attention to everything. Classes had become genuinely interesting rather than the tepid trickle of knowledge they would have been with blocks still in place. He was ahead in transfiguration, well ahead in charms, and in defense against the dark arts he was very carefully exactly at the level Quirrell's lesson plan expected, because some information is better kept to yourself until you've decided what to do with it. His relationship with the castle had continued to deepen in the quiet way of things that grow without being pushed. He knew 3 different ways to feel approaching footsteps through the stone floors. He knew which portraits would carry messages and which ones would gossip, and how to tell the difference. He knew that the castle's magic responded to intention, not in a genie-granting wishes sense, but in the way of a living system that had been observing students long enough to know when something was needed, that would occasionally, quietly, let the right door be slightly less locked than it should have been. And he knew, with the growing certainty of someone who had been paying close attention to a man for 2 months, that Quirrell was accelerating. The signs were subtle and would have been invisible to someone not looking for them. A slight increase in the number of times Quirrell visited the 3rd-floor corridor, Harry felt it through the castle, the same way he felt other things, as a disturbance in the ambient magic. A change in the quality of Quirrell's stillness during meals, less waiting, more tension, like a coiled thing. The specific way Quirrell's false stutter slipped very occasionally, for a half-syllable, into something smoother and more controlled before he caught it. And the dreams. They'd started in mid-October, not nightmares, not exactly, but something at the edge of sleep that wasn't entirely his own. A cold, dry intelligence pressing against the inside of his scar like a finger pressed against glass. Not breaking through, not even trying to, just present. Testing. The way you test a lock, not to open it immediately but to understand it. Harry had not been alarmed by this. He'd been interested. Because the intelligence behind the glass was doing the same thing Harry was doing in his waking hours, learning the shape of the barrier, looking for weak points, deciding whether a direct approach was warranted. It was, in a deeply strange way, recognizable. Like looking in a mirror in a dark room and not being entirely sure whose face you're seeing. He'd told Hermione about it on a Thursday morning in November while they walked to Charms, and she had gone through 3 distinct phases in about 10 seconds, alarm, recalibration, focused analysis, and landed on, you need to learn occlumency. What's occlumency? Mental shielding, she said. The magical practice of protecting your mind from external access. It's in Magical Defenses and the Dark Arts, Volume 2, which is in the restricted section, but I can, Hermione, Harry said. I can get us access legitimately, she finished, with dignity. I know you can, he said. But I'm not sure shielding is what I want to do. She looked at him. You want to use the connection. He's in there, Harry said, touching his scar. Something of him. A piece. And right now he's using it to learn about me. But it goes both ways. Hermione was quiet for a moment. You want to learn about him? He's going to make his move on the stone soon, Harry said. Probably before Christmas, because after Christmas the corridors are emptier and the school is quieter, and that's when I'd do it, if I were him. If I can use the connection before that, if I can understand what he's planning, it's extremely dangerous, Hermione said. So is letting him plan in the dark, Harry said. She didn't argue the logic, which was how Harry knew she agreed with it. That same Thursday evening, Harry sat in the common room after hours, the others gone to bed, the fire low, Fawkes on the arm of his chair looking significantly more like a phoenix now, proper red gold feathers coming in, though still small enough to fit comfortably in the crook of Harry's arm, and he sat very still and he listened. Not to the castle, not to the room, to the inside of his own head. The scar was quiet at first. Just the low, distant impression of something else present, the way you're aware of another person in a dark room without seeing them. Harry didn't push toward it. He just held his own mind very still and let the awareness sit, and after a while the quality of the silence changed. Less like an empty room, more like a room where something had been waiting for someone to stop moving around. A voice. Not a sound, there was no sound, no vibration, nothing happening in the air, but the experience of a voice, direct and cold and with the particular dry authority of something that had long ago stopped pretending to be anything other than what it was. You've been paying attention. Harry thought, without speaking, so have you. A pause. Not surprise, this thing did not seem to experience surprise in the conventional sense. More like the recalculation of someone who has tested a hypothesis and received a result that merits adjustment. The Phoenix changed you. I changed, Harry thought back. The Phoenix removed what was hiding it. Another pause. Longer. You know what's in the corridor? Yes. You know what I am? Yes. And you're not afraid? Harry considered this honestly. No. The presence in his scar was quiet for a moment, and Harry had the very strange sensation of being assessed. Not in the way a predator assesses prey, this was more technical than that, more mutual, the assessment of one player studying another across a board. Interesting, the voice said, and there was something in it that might have been, in a face, the ghost of a smile. You're Lily's son. I killed her. I know, Harry said. And you're not angry. I'm angry, Harry said. But anger is for after. Right now I'm talking to you. The fire cracked. Fawkes made a small soft sound and pressed closer against Harry's arm, radiating warmth. The old man built a cage for you, the voice said. I know about the blocks. I could feel them, a shape in the magic, always, like a door that should have been open. A pause that was almost contemplative. We have that in common. He managed us both. You killed my parents, Harry said. We don't have anything in common. Don't we? The voice was not trying to persuade, Harry noticed. It was genuinely curious, in the manner of something that had been thinking about this for a very long time. He built you to be a weapon against me. I became what I am partly because of what people built around me. We were both made into things without being asked. A pause. Doesn't that mean anything to you? It means, Harry said carefully, that Dumbledore was wrong to do what he did to both of us. It doesn't make what you did acceptable. It doesn't make us the same. He paused. Tom. The silence that followed that word was different from all the previous silences. Sharper. The cold intelligence behind the glass went absolutely still, and Harry felt the attention on him with a sudden intensity that was considerably less comfortable than anything before it. Don't, the voice said. Quiet. Precise. The word of someone for whom that name was a wound they had spent decades covering up. It's what you are, though, Harry said. Underneath all of it. Tom Riddle, who grew up in an orphanage and felt the world hadn't treated him fairly and decided to make the world sorry for it. He paused. I understand the first part. I don't forgive the second. The presence in his scar pulled back. Not a retreat, more like someone stepping back from a window. Putting a controlled distance between themselves and something that had gotten closer than expected. You're more than I was told, Voldemort said, and this time there was nothing in the voice except the flat acknowledgement of a fact. The old man's plan was built around something considerably smaller than you. His plan, Harry said, is no longer the plan. The connection closed. Not dramatically, no sensation, no pain, nothing cinematic. Just the quality of the silence in his head going back to being entirely his own, the way a room goes back to being a room once a visitor leaves. Harry opened his eyes. The fire was very low. Fawkes was watching him with orange eyes that were centuries old and currently looking at him with the expression of something that had been paying attention and was satisfied with what it had seen. He's afraid of me, Harry said quietly. Not with satisfaction, just with the precise, useful understanding of a person noting something strategically important. Not of what I can do. Of what I know. Fawkes made a sound that might have been agreement. Harry banked the fire and went to bed. The next day was a Friday, which meant afternoon defense against the dark arts, and Harry sat in his usual seat in the second row and watched Quirrell deliver a lesson on counterjinxes with the particular attentiveness of someone watching a performance they already know the end of. The stutter was in place. The nervous mannerisms were in place. The very careful magical signature management was in place. Harry could feel the effort of it now, the way you can feel the effort of a person holding something heavy when you know what heavy looks like. Voldemort was suppressing himself. Keeping himself low, quiet, contained within Quirrell's frame, because he'd understood from the first week of term that Harry was aware of him and he didn't want to give more away than necessary. Harry respected the discipline while absolutely not being fooled by it. After class, he caught Ron and Hermione in the corridor. 2 weeks, he said. Maybe 3. He's going to move on the stone. Ron looked at him. How do you know? I talked to him, Harry said. Ron stopped walking. You talked to you-know-who. Through the scar connection, Harry said. Last night. He's planning something and he's close to ready. He kept walking, standing still in a corridor while discussing this seemed counterproductive. He knows we know. He doesn't care. He thinks he's past the point where it matters. Is he? Hermione asked. No, Harry said. But he's not entirely wrong that the timeline has moved up. If we're going to be prepared, we need to be prepared now, not at the end of the year. Prepared meaning what, exactly? Ron said. Harry looked at him. We need to know what's under that trapdoor. All of it. Every obstacle Dumbledore put in place. Because when the time comes we're not going in blind. Hermione was quiet for a moment. You want to go down there before Voldemort does. I want to know the terrain, Harry said. That's not the same as going after him. When he makes his move, and he will make his move on his schedule, I can't stop that, I want to know exactly what we're walking into. No surprises. They were passing the library now. Hermione looked at the door with the expression she got when she was deciding whether a problem could be solved through reading and was reluctantly concluding it couldn't. Right, she said. So we need floor plans. Information about whatever Dumbledore had the staff build down there. She thought for a moment. Professor McGonagall contributed something. She mentioned it once in class, an enchanted chess set, I think, or something similar. She didn't say it was for the stone, just mentioned it as an example of large-scale transfiguration applied to games. Snape did something too, Ron said. I overheard the twins talking. Something with potions. Locked doors and logic puzzles, apparently. Sprout would be plants, probably, Harry said. Flitwick charms. Quirrell, he paused. Quirrell would have added something too. Which means there's an obstacle down there built by the man who's trying to get past it. Hermione looked at him. He would have built something he could bypass. Exactly, Harry said. So that obstacle we can ignore. Whatever Quirrell put down there won't actually slow him down. The ones we need to understand are the others. They ate dinner at the Gryffindor table and talked quietly under the general noise of 400 students having a Friday, and by the end of the meal they had a rough map of what to expect below the third-floor corridor and what it would take to navigate it. McGonagall found Harry as he was leaving the Great Hall. She appeared at his shoulder with the smooth economy of movement that was specific to her, looking like she'd happened to be going the same direction, and said quietly, "My office, after 7, and was gone before he had to respond. At 7, he went. Her office was austere and warm simultaneously, severe stone walls, a very good fire, a desk with exacting stacks of marked essays, and on the windowsill a small tin of shortbread that she did not offer him but whose existence communicated something about the person who kept it. She was standing at the window looking out at the grounds when he came in. I spoke with Albus, she said, without turning. On Monday. I've been waiting until I had processed the conversation sufficiently to report it to you without editorializing. A pause. I find I'm still not entirely past the editorializing stage, but I've waited long enough. What did he say? Harry asked. She turned. Her face was composed with the effort of a woman who had a great deal to say and had organized it into the form that would be most useful rather than the form that would be most satisfying. He confirmed everything, she said. The blocks. The plan. The understanding, dating back to the night of your parents' deaths, that you were to be managed. Guided. Delivered to the correct moment in the correct condition. She paused. He said it was necessary. He said the prophecy required a specific sequence of events and that any deviation from that sequence risked. She stopped. He used the phrase catastrophic loss of life. He was not wrong that the stakes are real. He was not wrong that Voldemort must be stopped and that stopping him requires sacrifice. Her voice held the particular strain of someone doing justice to an argument they have found deeply wanting. But the sacrifice he had in mind was yours, and you were never consulted. You were never told. You were shaped and then aimed. She met his eyes. That is not something I can defend, Mr. Potter. Not with all the goodwill in the world. Harry nodded. He also told me, she continued, something I suspect he intended me to pass on to you. Not directly, he was indirect about it, which I found additionally frustrating, but the substance of it was this, the thing in your scar. He believes it to be a fragment of Voldemort's own soul. Created accidentally on the night of your parents' deaths, when the killing curse rebounded and Voldemort's soul, already damaged, already unstable from certain dark practices he had engaged in, fractured, and a splinter of it lodged in you. Harry was very still. He believes, McGonagall said carefully, that for Voldemort to be truly destroyed, this fragment must be destroyed as well. A pause. He has not told me the mechanism by which he intended to accomplish that. But he implied, Harry said slowly, that the mechanism involves me. Yes, she said. The fire was the only sound for a moment. A piece of Voldemort's soul, Harry said, living in my scar. For 11 years. He thought about the presence he'd felt in his dreams, the cold intelligence behind the glass. That's what I was talking to, last night. McGonagall looked at him sharply. You communicated with it, It communicated with me first, Harry said. I just answered. He paused. He confirmed the stone is the target. He's going to move within 2 weeks. She closed her eyes briefly. Then opened them. You're planning to be there? Yes. With your friends. With Ron and Hermione, Harry said. And I'd like your help in understanding the obstacles. She was quiet for a long moment. Harry watched her and did not push. He understood that he was asking her to step significantly over a line that she had been careful not to cross for 40 years, and that asking her to do it quickly was unfair, and that her integrity required her to decide it properly. My contribution to the protections below, she said at last, is a life-size enchanted chess set. The pieces are charmed to play seriously and the only way through is to win or sacrifice strategically. I designed it assuming the intruder would be alone. She paused. I can tell you the configuration. Please, Harry said. She told him. He listened with complete attention and asked 3 precise questions and she answered them all, and when it was done she said, Potter, in the tone that was not Professor McGonagall but just McGonagall, the person underneath the roll. He waited. If something happens to you down there, she began. Something's already happened to me, he said, without heat, and the simplicity of it seemed to land somewhere in the older woman with a weight she absorbed quietly. I know the risks. I'm not going down there recklessly. I'm going down there prepared. She nodded. And McGonagall, he said, standing. What was the mechanism? The one Dumbledore was planning. For the piece of Voldemort in my scar. She looked at him steadily. He didn't tell me the specifics. But you have a theory. A pause. Brief and telling. I have a theory, she said, that I hope very much is wrong. She didn't say what it was. Harry didn't push, because he'd already worked most of it out and the confirmation would keep. He left her office and walked back toward Gryffindor Tower, and the castle was cold and lit by guttering torches, and Fawkes flew above him through the corridor, which was a new development. The phoenix was large enough now to fly properly, and had taken to following Harry through the castle at heights that would have required a very tall person to duck, trailing warmth like a wake. Harry watched him bank around the corner and thought about pieces of soul. He'd been a part of Voldemort for 11 years without knowing it. Some small, cold fragment of the man who'd murdered his parents had been living in his forehead like a splinter, watching through borrowed eyes, sleeping in a borrowed mind. The thought should have been deeply disturbing. Instead it was, clarifying. He'd talked to it. He'd held his own mind steady while Voldemort tested him and he'd tested back, and neither of them had won that exchange, and both of them knew it. The thing in his scar was not Voldemort, not the full Voldemort, not even a coherent fraction of him, more like a recording of his intent, a fragment of purpose left behind like smoke on a curtain. It had intelligence without body, will without continuity, power without direction. Which meant it had weaknesses. He climbed through the portrait hole. Ron and Hermione were waiting with the look of people who had been waiting for a while and had decided against pretending they hadn't. Neville was also there, which had become the new normal, Neville who was quietly expanding like a plant that had been underwatered, straightening up and taking space with the graduated confidence of someone who was being, for possibly the first time, genuinely included. McGonagall's chess set, Harry said, sitting down. It's a life-size board, full enchantment, plays to win. Hermione, can you play? Very well, she said. Ron, Harry said, turning. Ron's expression shifted into something with the quality of a person discovering that a skill they've had since childhood is suddenly relevant in an important way. I can play, he said. Properly. Good, Harry said. Because that one's yours. Ron nodded with a simplicity that meant he'd already understood it would be. Snape's contribution is a potions logic puzzle, Harry said. A line of bottles, one correct passage through fire. Hermione. Obviously, she said. The plant trap, devil's snare, probably, or something similar. Light and heat counters it. Fawkes, Neville said immediately, looking at the phoenix on Harry's shoulder, who was radiating more than enough warmth to handle a dark plant. Flitix would be a key, Harry said. An enchanted flying key. We'd need brooms. Ron said, you'd be better at that than any of us. Which was true and they all knew it. Quirrels we skip, Harry said. Whatever he put there, it's designed to let him through. We move past it. And the mirror? Hermione said. Harry looked at her. He hadn't told them about the mirror. I found a reference, she said, unapologetic. In a restricted text about the Philosopher's Stone specifically. Dumbledore has used something called the Mirror of Erist as a final obstacle. It was brought to the school this year. It shows you the deepest desire of your heart. She paused. I think the key is that someone who doesn't want to use the stone but only wants to find it will see it in their reflection. Someone who wants it for personal gain will only see themselves using it. She looked at Harry with the directness of someone delivering something they've thought about carefully. You're the only one who can get the stone from the mirror, Harry. Because I don't want it for myself, Harry said. Because you want to keep it from Voldemort, she said. That's the specific, non-selfish desire that the mirror responds to. She paused. Dumbledore built it for you. The whole sequence culminates in you standing in front of the mirror. And then Voldemort arrives, Harry said. And then Voldemort arrives, she confirmed. Harry absorbed this. He built the whole chamber as a funnel. Everything beneath the third floor leads specifically to a confrontation between me and Voldemort in front of the mirror. He looked at the fire. He really did think of everything. Except Fawkes, Ron said. Except Fawkes, Harry agreed. He looked at the phoenix, who was engaged in the grooming of a tail feather with the serene irrelevance of something that was absolutely not paying attention to the conversation. He's not going to like what I'm planning. Dumbledore? Hermione asked. Voldemort, Harry said. He paused. Dumbledore either. But Voldemort specifically. What are you planning? Ron asked. Harry looked at the fire for a moment. Then at his friends, at Ron, who had come from a family that had given everything to the right side of this war and would give more without hesitation, and at Hermione, who was the sharpest mind he had ever encountered and who aimed it with the precision of someone who had decided that truth was not just preferable but required, and at Neville, who was sitting very quietly with his hands on his knees and the steady expression of someone who had decided to be whatever was needed. I'm going to face Voldemort in that chamber, he said. But not as a piece on Dumbledore's board. Not as a child who wandered in through desperation. Deliberately. Informed. Prepared. He paused. And I'm going to end it. Not the way Dumbledore planned it, not by being a vessel for some elaborate sacrifice, but cleanly. On my terms. You don't know how, Hermione said. Not doubtful, careful. Precise. Not yet, Harry said. But I know something Dumbledore doesn't, and I think Voldemort doesn't entirely, and it's the most important thing. He touched his scar. The piece of him in here, it's been in contact with my magic for 11 years. During those 11 years, even suppressed, my magic was running. Living. Growing. And everything it touched, even through the blocks, it changed. The piece of Voldemort in my scar has been marinating in Lily Potter's sacrifice magic for 11 years. He paused. Love as a magical force doesn't just protect. It transforms. Whatever is in my scar, it's not what it was when it got here. The fire cracked. Fawkes looked up from his tail feather. It's weaker, Hermione said slowly. The fragment. It's been degraded by the protective magic around it. I think so, Harry said. I think when I talk to it, when I use the connection, I'm not talking to a piece of Voldemort at full strength. I'm talking to a piece that's been slowly, continuously, unavoidably softened. He paused. I don't know what that means for how to remove it. But I know it means the removal doesn't have to cost what Dumbledore thought it would. Hermione said nothing for a long moment. When she spoke it was quietly and with the specific quality of someone forming a new hypothesis in real time. "Phoenix tears," she said. They all looked at her. "Phoenix tears heal," she said. "Any wound, any damage, it's the strongest healing magic known, because Phoenix magic is built on the cycle of destruction and renewal. Death and rebirth." She looked at Fawkes. "If the fragment in Harry's scar is a wound, and it is, it's a wound to his soul, then Phoenix tears might not just heal the damage. They might dissolve the fragment. Purify it. The way fire purifies." She was leaning forward now, all the way forward, the way she only did when she was certain. Fawkes didn't just burn away Harry's blocks on the first night. He was doing something to the scar too. I think he was beginning a process. The silence that followed was the kind that happens when several people simultaneously realize something is larger than they'd thought. Harry looked at Fawkes. Fawkes looked back at him with orange eyes that were ancient and absolutely noncommittal. "You've been working on it since the feast," Harry said. Fawkes tucked his head briefly under his wing and brought it back out, which may or may not have been a nod. "Right," Harry said. "Right." He exhaled slowly. "So when it comes to it, when I'm face to face with Voldemort in that chamber, I don't need a sacrifice. I need Fawkes." "And us," Ron said, firmly. "And you," Harry said. "When?" Hermione asked. Harry considered. "He'll move before the end of November. Something's changed, he's feeling pressured, he knows we know, and there's something else driving him, some urgency I could feel through the connection. He doesn't have endless time." He paused. "We stay ready. When it happens, it'll happen quickly. Quirrell will make his move at night, probably after midnight, when the corridors are clear. We'll know when it starts because I'll feel it through the scar." "You'll feel him moving toward the corridor," Hermione said. "Yes." He looked around at them. "Sleep with your shoes on." There was a moment of complete silence, and then Ron laughed, a sudden, genuine laugh, the kind that arrives when something is both alarming and exactly right, and Hermione smiled in the way she smiled when things had been resolved into a plan, and Neville looked at his hands and then at Harry and said, very quietly, "I want to come too." Harry looked at him. "Neville." I know I'm not the best at magic yet," Neville said, with the steadiness of someone who has decided to say a thing properly. "But I'm better than people think, and I'm getting better faster than before, and," he paused. "I'm not afraid of him. Not anymore. I was for a long time because of what he did to my parents. But I'm not afraid now." He met Harry's eyes. "I want to be there." Harry considered. Neville Longbottom, who had been told all his life that he was insufficient, sitting in a Gryffindor common room offering himself with the complete sincerity of someone who has decided their own mind. "You're in," Harry said. The fire burned. Fawkes made his soft sound. Outside, the November wind worked at the window latches, and the castle settled around them, and somewhere on the third floor, behind an iron-banded door under 8 layers of careful enchantment, the Philosopher's Stone sat in the dark and waited to be wanted by the wrong people. And in the corridor below the astronomy tower, a man in a purple turban stood at a dark window and looked at the grounds, and the thing sharing his body pressed cold hands against the inside of his skin, and thought about an 11-year-old boy who was not what it had expected, and recalibrated, and decided that regardless of the variables, the trajectory was fixed. The stone was close. The body that hosted it was almost spent. The form of serpent and shadow and borrowed flesh could not persist indefinitely, and it had been waiting long enough. It would move before the month was out. Above the castle, unconstrained by walls, a red gold phoenix made a long spiraling climb into the November dark and sang once, clearly, into the cold air, a sound that carried no words but had a meaning that anyone with the right kind of listening could have translated. Ready. Chapter 5, The Corridor Beneath Everything. The scar woke Harry at midnight on the 23rd of November. Not pain, nothing as simple as pain. More like a door being opened in a room he'd been keeping track of, the particular sensation of something that had been still beginning to move. He was awake and sitting up before he'd consciously decided to be, the way you respond to certain sounds before you've identified them. He sat in the dark for 2 seconds. 3. Then he reached over and touched Ron's shoulder, twice, firm. Ron was awake instantly. Years of sharing a room with 6 Weasleys had apparently given him the reflexes of someone accustomed to things happening without announcement. He sat up, looked at Harry's face in the dark, and reached for his shoes without saying a word. Harry pulled on his robes, pocketed his wand, and picked up Fawkes from the bedpost. The phoenix was already awake, already warm, with the quality of something that had been ready for longer than Harry had been. His feathers had fully come in over the past weeks, deep red shading to gold at the wingtips, larger now than he'd been before the burning day, the restored version of a phoenix being somehow more vivid than the one you'd started with. He stepped onto Harry's arm and gripped with the steady confidence of something that knew exactly where it was going. Harry crossed to Hermione's dorm door and knocked 3 times in the pattern they'd agreed. She opened it 15 seconds later, fully dressed, her hair pulled back, with her bag on her shoulder and the look of someone who had not, in fact, been asleep. "Now?" she said. "Now," Harry said. "Neville?" Ron said, behind him. They stopped at Neville's curtain. He was already sitting up, his face pale but his jaw set in the way it had been that night in the common room when he'd said, "I want to be there." "I felt something too," Neville said, pulling on his jumper. "Different from what you felt, I think, but something shifted." "Like the castle noticed." Harry nodded. The castle had noticed. He could feel it, a subtle tightening in the ambient magic, the specific quality of an old building's wards recognizing that one of the patterns they'd been holding had changed. Something had moved toward the 3rd-floor corridor, and the castle was paying attention the way it paid attention to everything, quietly, thoroughly, without comment. They went down. The common room was empty, the fire banked to embers, the red and gold of the walls soft and dim in the low light. They went through the portrait hole, the fat lady grumbled without waking, and into the corridor, and Harry took point without discussing it and walked toward the 3rd floor with the others behind him. The castle at midnight was different from the castle in the day in ways that were more than just darkness and quiet. The magic was different, less distributed, more concentrated, like electricity in the hours before a storm. The portrait slept. The staircases had settled into configurations that were less convenient and Harry rerouted twice, following the path the castle made available rather than fighting the one it didn't, which was something he'd learned worked better. On the 3rd floor, the corridor was empty. The door at the end was open. Not broken, not forced, just open. Whatever Quirrell had done to it had been clean, effortless, the work of someone who had been planning the approach for months and had left nothing to improvise. Harry paused at the doorway and looked in. The room beyond was large and dark, and in the dark, very clearly audible, was the sound of something large breathing. The 3-headed dog, Fluffy, as they'd heard it called, which struck Harry as either the greatest or worst name in history, was asleep. All 3 heads. The slow, massive bellows rhythm of something very large in a very deep sleep, the specific kind of sleep that comes from music. A small enchanted harp sat in the corner, playing itself quietly, barely audible under the breathing. Quirrell's contribution to the approach, music to sedate the guardian. And in the center of the room, the trapdoor, open, the darkness below it absolute. "He's already down," Harry said quietly. "How long?" Hermione asked. "Not long. 10 minutes, maybe." He could feel the scar connection differently now, not a presence in his mind but a direction, something tugging in the way a compass tugs, pointing down. He hasn't reached the stone yet. He looked at Fluffy. All 3 heads were breathing in deep, separate rhythms. The harp was winding down, the enchantment on it wouldn't last indefinitely. 10 minutes at most before the dog woke. "Quickly," Harry said. He went through the trapdoor first. The drop was further than expected, landing in something soft and yielding and immediately grabby, devil's snare, thick ropes of it, purple dark and alive in the way of something that had been waiting for exactly this. It wrapped his right arm before he could react, and the instinct was to pull back, but Harry had read about Devil's Snare 2 weeks ago and held very still while Fawkes, still on his left arm, heated the air around them to approximately the temperature of a small sun. The plant recoiled. Not gradually, immediately, a rapid unraveling, the specific retreat of something that remembered, on a biological level, what fire did to it. Harry landed on his feet on the floor below as the snare peeled itself away from him. Ron dropped behind him and the plant made one grab before Fawkes turned on it and it let go. Hermione landed neatly. Neville came last, and the plant had given up by then, hanging back from the warmth. Fawkes was radiating with the sullen withdrawal of something that knew it had lost. The next chamber was the keys. The ceiling was full of them, hundreds of enchanted keys, glittering in the torchlight that appeared from nowhere, all shapes and sizes, all flying in the mad independent patterns of charms given too much autonomy and not enough direction. At the far end of the chamber, a locked door. On a hook beside the door, 4 broomsticks. One of those keys opens the door, Hermione said, scanning the ceiling. An old-fashioned one, probably. Flitwick tends toward the classical in his charm design. Harry was already on the broom. He didn't think about flying. Thinking about flying was something that happened on the ground. In the air, the broom moved with him the way a well-made tool moves with a skilled user, which was to say it felt like intention given a physical form, and Harry moved through the chaos of flying keys with the quick, reading calm of someone who had an instinct for flight that was less like talent and more like recognition, as though his body remembered something his mind had never been taught. He spotted the key in 40 seconds. It was older than the others, slightly bent at one wing from a previous use, the mark of a key that had been turned in a lock before. He cut through the swarm and took it cleanly, a one-handed grab at speed that sent a cascade of keys scattering in his wake. The door opened. They moved through. The chess room hit them with the scale of it, a vaulted ceiling and a board that stretched the width of the room, the pieces life-size, stone and silent until they saw the 4 students enter, at which point they moved with the smooth, menacing purpose of things that took the game very seriously. Ron looked at the board for 10 seconds. Harry watched him look at it. There was something specific that happened in Ron's face when he looked at a chessboard, a quality of complete attention that was different from any other kind of attention Harry had seen him give anything, something that lived in him at a depth that most of his personality sat on top of. He tracked lines of play that Harry couldn't see, reading the position the way Harry read flight paths, with a speed and certainty that came from somewhere beyond teaching. Right, Ron said. This is already in progress. Quirrell played through it, he left the pieces, he scanned quickly. He sacrificed everything on the left flank to cut through. The board knows he got through. It's reset partway, or, he paused, and something shifted in his face. No. It's set up for a second game. It's ready for someone else. He walked forward, studying the pieces. Hermione, Neville, Harry, take those positions. The white bishop, the castle on the queen's side, and the knight. He pointed to each. Don't move unless I say. What about you? Harry asked. Ron's jaw tightened. I'll take the queen's knight. We need to clear the path fast. That means sacrificing something. He looked at Harry directly. Don't worry about me. Get through when I say. They moved to their squares. The pieces that had occupied them stepped aside with the grave courtesy of things that knew a better player when they saw one. Ron stood on his square and the knight piece looked at him and then, with something that in a stone face was almost deference, stepped back. The game began. It was fast and brutal and entirely in Ron's hands. Harry moved twice when told to, both times advancing, and understood that he was not playing chess, he was a piece being played, and the person playing him was very good. Hermione moved when directed, her expression a mixture of intelligent frustration at being made a component and genuine admiration for the quality of the control. Neville moved once, a blocking move that Ron directed with precision, and Neville executed it perfectly. The opposing pieces were merciless. They took Ron's Queen's Knight in the third exchange, and Ron absorbed this without expression, walking off his square and watching the board while the remaining pieces reorganized. He directed from the edge, quick, quiet, absolutely certain, and in 8 more moves the White King was in check and the door beyond the board was clear. "Go," Ron said. "Ron," Harry started. "I'm fine," Ron said, and he was standing whole and unhurt. The sacrifice had been the stone piece, not the boy, but his voice was the voice of someone who was holding something difficult inside a composed exterior and didn't want it examined. "Go, Harry. I'll wait here and make sure nothing resets. Go." Harry went. Beyond the chessboard was a room that smelled of something cold and sharp, and in it, 7 bottles sat in a line on a stone ledge, a wall of black flame at one end and purple at the other. A rolled parchment lay beside the bottles, and Hermione went to it before Harry could ask. She read it in 12 seconds. "Logic puzzle," she said. "Potions. One takes you forward through the black flame, one takes you back through the purple. The others are wine or poison." She scanned the riddle again, lips moving. "The smallest bottle. That's the one that goes forward." She held it out to Harry. He took it. "What about you?" "Getting back. Second from the left," she said. She looked at him. "There's only enough for one to go forward." "I know," Harry said. "Take Neville back through the purple. Get Ron. Go up, get out, and send an owl to McGonagall. Don't wait for me. Harry, Hermione." His voice was steady. Not harsh, not impatient, just clear. The voice of someone who had made a decision from a position of full information and wasn't going to renegotiate it under pressure. "I know what's down there. I know what I'm going to face. I've been preparing for this specifically. Trust me." She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were bright, and he knew she was running a calculation, risk assessment, probability, alternatives, and he watched her reach the conclusion that there were no better options and let herself land on it. "Come back," she said. Not a question. "Yes," he said. Not a reassurance. A fact. She took the return bottle, and he held hers, and they went through the purple flame together and separated, she and Neville back through the chess room, Harry turning to face the black. He drank the smallest bottle. The cold was immediate and brief, and the black flame parted around him, and on the other side was the last room. It was large. Vaulted ceiling, stone walls bare of everything except a single standing mirror in the center of the room, taller than 2 men, framed in gold and ornate in the way of something that was meant to look important because it was, and along the base of it, a script that Harry read in the torchlight without slowing his step, Eris stra eru oit ube kafru oit anwosi. He would have paused to look at it, if the room had been empty. It wasn't. Quirrell was standing in front of the mirror. His back was to Harry, his posture rigid, his hands at his sides, and he was looking into the glass with the fixed attention of someone who had been looking for some time and was finding the experience increasingly frustrating. "I see it," Quirrell was saying. Not to Harry, to himself. Or to the thing on the back of his head. "I see myself presenting it. I have it in my hand. But I can't, it won't, it's not working," Harry said, "because you want to use it." Quirrell turned. His face did something complicated. The nervous, stammering Dada professor, that face was gone, completely and without pretense, the mask having finally been determined unnecessary. What was underneath was tired and sharp and resolute in the particular way of someone who has committed to a path so fully that the path is now the only thing they are. "Potter," he said. No stutter. "Quirrell," Harry said. They stood 8 feet apart in the torchlight, and the mirror stood between them and slightly to the left, and in the silence of the chamber the sound of whatever lived in Quirrell's head was present and pressuring, and Harry felt it in his scar, not through the dream quality of the sleeping connection, but directly, fully, the cold intelligence awake and close and entirely aware. "Step aside," Quirrell said. "I have no quarrel with you tonight. You have my parents' blood on your hands, Harry said. That's a quarrel whether you want it to be or not. Quirrell's jaw tightened. He is more powerful than you can, I know exactly what he is, Harry said. I've been talking to him for weeks. A pause. Something changed in Quirrell's posture, a shift, subtle, the kind of shift that happens when the person occupying a body is not in complete agreement with what the body was about to do. He said that you were changed. Different. His voice had a quality of someone relaying a message that was not entirely his own. He wants to see you. Himself. Then he should come out, Harry said. The words dropped into the room quietly and clearly, like a stone into water. Nothing happened for 3 seconds. Then Quirrell raised his hands to his turban, and Harry watched him unwrap it, layer by layer, with the slow and deliberate movements of someone who was doing something irreversible and had decided to do it consciously. The turban fell. Quirrell turned around. The face on the back of his head it was not a face in any complete sense. It was the impression of one. No nose. Eyes that were red and slit-pupilled and very alive, vivid in the way of a flame in the dark, too bright for the rest of the face around them. A mouth that was thin and wide and curved upward in something that was not quite a smile. Harry Potter, Voldemort said, through the mouth on the back of Quirrell's head, and his voice was extraordinary. Low and carrying, with the resonance of something that had existed so long on pure will that the will had become a physical quality. Every word had the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Look at you. Look at you, Harry said. Voldemort was quiet for a moment. The red eyes studied him with an attention that was both clinical and, somewhere beneath the clinical surface, something else, something that Harry recognized from the connection, from the voice in his scar. Curiosity. Real curiosity, the kind that could not be performed because it was involuntary. You came here deliberately, Voldemort said. Not by accident. Not by desperation. He tilted the borrowed head slightly. You prepared. Yes, Harry said. Against me. Specifically you, Harry said. All year. The red eyes moved to Fawkes, who was on Harry's shoulder with his wings slightly spread, radiating the warmth of something that had chosen its side. The eyes held on the phoenix for a moment. Interesting choice of companion, Voldemort said. Dumbledore's phoenix. Not anymore, Harry said. He chose me. On the first night. Because of the blocks, Voldemort said. Because he knew what you were. A pause. Dumbledore was afraid of you. You were afraid of me too, Harry said. That's why you ran, after my parents. You could have stayed. You were powerful enough to take on the entire order. But you ran, and you used my parents as an excuse to retreat from something you sensed and didn't understand. Quirrell's hands twitched. The red eyes narrowed, not anger, exactly, more the expression of something identifying an approach it had not anticipated. You're trying to provoke me, Voldemort said. I'm naming what happened, Harry said. You touched my mother's magic through me when the curse rebounded. Love magic. Old magic. You didn't understand it and it terrified you, because you've spent your whole life building a system based on the premise that power is finite and quantifiable and the person who accumulates the most of it is safest, and then you ran into something that didn't function by those rules at all. The red eyes were very bright. And you've had a piece of yourself sitting in my scar, Harry continued, for 11 years. Marinating in the same magic you didn't understand. The same magic you can't counter. He paused. How does it feel? Voldemort said nothing. Because I can feel it, Harry said. Through the connection. The piece of you in my head, it's not what it was when it got there. It's been changed. My mother's protection changes things. It doesn't just shield, it transforms. And the part of you that's been living in her son for 11 years has been transformed whether you wanted it to be or not. Enough, Quirrell said, and it was Quirrell speaking, Quirrell's own voice, thin and desperate, the voice of a man who had been a passenger in his own body for a year and was reaching the end of what he could endure. "My lord, the stone. We need, be quiet, Quirinus," Voldemort said softly. Quirrell went quiet. Voldemort looked at Harry with the particular attention of something recalibrating. "You've worked out the fragment," he said. "Yes. And Dumbledore's plan. The sacrifice he had in mind." "Yes," Harry said. "And I've worked out a different way." "You think the Phoenix can remove it," Voldemort said. Still clinical. Still assessing. As though the conversation were a technical problem rather than a confrontation. "Healing magic against a soul fragment. Phoenix fire," Harry said. "The cycle of death and rebirth. Specifically designed to purify." He paused. "Your fragment has been weakened by a year of preparation. The burning day started the process. Every day since has continued it." He looked at the red eyes steadily. "I don't think it's going to hurt much." "You're not concerned," Voldemort said, "about what you lose when it's gone." Harry thought about this honestly. The fragment had been part of him for 11 years. Had informed his awareness, his sensitivity, his capacity to feel magic in ways that went beyond what even the blocks had contained. Some of what he was came from that piece of dark magic living in his head. He wasn't naive about that. "I'm not keeping a piece of you to preserve myself," Harry said. "Whatever I lose, I'll build back. On my terms." The red eyes held on him. "You are nothing like what he told me you would be," Voldemort said, and in his voice, beneath all the power and the cold and the centuries of will, something that was, if not respect, then the closest thing to it this person was capable of. "He told me you would be small. Naive. Emotional. He spent 11 years making you small." The mouth curved. "He failed." "Yes," Harry said. "And you won't make his mistake," Voldemort said. "You won't try to manage me. You're going to try to destroy me." "I'm going to destroy the fragment in my head," Harry said. "Tonight. With or without your cooperation." He paused. "The rest of you, what remains of you, that's a different problem for a different time. But this piece, in my scar, has to go." Quirrell took 3 steps forward. His wand was up, and the magic coming from him was sudden and powerful, not Quirrell's magic, but Voldemort's, dark and enormous, and wielded through a borrowed wand with the force of someone who had not been able to use this for a very long time and was doing it now with the relief of someone uncorking something that had been bottled too long. "Crucio," Quirrell said. Harry moved. Not a dodge, it wasn't refined enough for that. It was instinct, pure and physical, his body taking him left before his mind had finished processing the wand movement. The curse hit the wall behind him and the stone smoked. Harry was moving as he landed, covering ground, not away from Quirrell but toward him, closing the distance in the way you close distance when your opponent expects range. He grabbed Quirrell's wrist. The effect was immediate and total and not something Harry had planned. The skin contact, Harry's hands on Quirrell's wrist, produced a reaction in Voldemort's borrowed flesh that was specific and violent. The magic in Harry's skin, the accumulated 11 years of Lily Potter's love sacrifice, hit the magic animating Quirrell's flesh like acid hits metal. Quirrell screamed. Not a performance, a real scream, high and desperate, the sound of something burning from the inside out. Harry held on. Not because he was being cruel. Because Fawkes, who had launched from his shoulder the moment Harry moved, was circling above them now, and the tears were falling, pure, silver-bright drops of phoenix tears, more than Harry had known a phoenix could produce, falling on Harry's hands and on Quirrell's wrists and on the contact point between them, and where they fell the burning became something else. Not pain. Purification. The difference between a wound being torn open and a wound being cleaned. Harry felt the fragment in his scar respond. Felt it recognize what was happening, felt the piece of Voldemort that had been living in him for 11 years feel the tears and the love magic and the phoenix fire converging, and for a moment, through the connection, he felt something that was not Voldemort and not Harry but the strange, weakened, transformed thing that the fragment had become after 11 years of living in the wrong body. It felt, very distantly, like relief. He let go of Quirrell. The professor crumpled. Not dead, Harry checked, fast, the pulse was there, weak and rapid, but out, entirely, the magic that had been animating him having retreated into whatever vestige of itself remained. The voice in Harry's scar was quiet. He touched the scar. The warmth was different, not the familiar low ache that he'd had all his life and never noticed as anything other than normal, but a clean warmth, the warmth of something that had been a wound and was healing. He could feel the fragment, feel where it was, feel what Fawkes's tears were doing to it, the slow, painless process of something dark and isolated being dissolved by something that was specifically designed to dissolve it. Easy, he said, to no one, or to the fragment, or to himself. It's done. Let go. Fawkes landed on his shoulder and pressed close. The scar heated once, a brief, bright flare, like a flame burning through the last of its fuel, and then went cool. Cool in a way it had never been. Cool in the way of a surface without a splinter. Clean. Harry exhaled. He stood in the chamber for a moment in the quiet. The mirror stood to his left, and he glanced at it, caught his reflection without intending to, and in the glass he saw himself, clearly and simply, standing with a phoenix on his shoulder, looking back. Just himself. No desired future. No imagined victory. Just Harry Potter, at 11 years old, standing in the chamber beneath Hogwarts after a fight he had chosen to be ready for, in possession of himself in a way he hadn't been 10 hours ago. He looked for the stone. It appeared in his pocket a moment later, a small, warm weight against his hip, and he reached in and pulled it out. Red as a deep garnet. Warm in his palm. The mirror of Eriste had given it to him the moment he'd looked into it wanting nothing for himself. He looked at the stone for a moment. Then he put it in his pocket and turned to Quirrell. The man was breathing. Shallowly, but breathing. Whatever Voldemort had been doing to him, borrowing his body, pushing his magic through it, demanding more than a human form was built to sustain, the evacuation had left damage. Not fatal, Harry thought, but serious. He knelt beside him. Quirrell, he said. The professor's eyes opened. They were bloodshot and exhausted and terrified, but they were his own eyes. Whatever quality the possession had added, that quality was gone. He looked at Harry with the expression of someone who was not sure they deserved to be looked at with anything other than contempt and was finding the absence of contempt more difficult than the contempt would have been. Am I? Quirrell started. Stopped. Breathing, Harry said. You'll need help I can't give you here. I'm going to send a phoenix. He looked at Fawkes. Stay with him. Bring McGonagall. Fawkes made a sound of acknowledgement, lifted from Harry's shoulder, and landed beside Quirrell with the careful deliberateness of something that understood exactly what was needed and was prepared to provide it. Harry stood. Looked at the mirror once more. Looked at the stone in his palm. Then he turned and walked back through the black flame, through the potions room, through the chess room, where Ron was sitting on the floor against the wall, arms on his knees, head tilted back, and stopped. Ron. Ron looked up. His face went through about 6 expressions very quickly, the last one being a relief so profound it temporarily undid his composure. He stood. You're all right. You went in there and, are you? I'm fine, Harry said. Did you? Yes. Ron looked at him for a moment with the complete attention of someone reading whether fine was code for something else. Apparently decided it wasn't. Hermione's going to be awful about being right, he said. She was right, Harry said. She can be awful about it. Ron nodded. Started toward the door to the keys room, and stopped. Turned back. The thing in your scar, he said. Gone, Harry said. Ron was quiet for a moment. Does it feel different? Harry considered this honestly. It feels like when you've been carrying something for so long you've stopped noticing the weight, he said, and then you put it down. Ron looked at him, and something in his face was very honest and very simple and very 16 going on 12, which was where Ron actually lived emotionally regardless of the composure he aimed for. Good, he said. That's, yeah. Good. They went up through the trapdoor, through the sleeping room, Fluffy still under, the harp winding down to its last notes, and into the corridor, and the castle shifted around them as they moved, the magic of it settling back into ordinary overnight rhythms, the heightened awareness dissipating now that what had triggered it was resolved. Hermione was waiting at the top of the stairs with McGonagall. McGonagall took one look at Harry, at the state of his robes, at the calm of his face, and said, "The stone," in a voice that was completely controlled and very tight. Harry handed it to her. She held it with both hands, looked at it, and then looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite categorize, too many things moving through it too quickly, relief and anger and something that was in the neighborhood of awe without being comfortable with itself. "Quirrell needs medical assistance," Harry said. "Fawkes is with him. I think he'll recover, but he's been through something significant." "And Voldemort?" she said. "Gone," Harry said. "From Quirrell at least. The fragment in my scar is gone too." He paused. "Fawkes." She nodded. She looked at the stone again. Then she said, very quietly, "You could have told me you were going tonight." "I didn't know until midnight," Harry said. "And by the time I knew, there wasn't time." "Harry." She said just his name, not his surname, which was different. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Truly?" "Truly," he said. "I was ready. We all were." He glanced at Hermione, at Ron coming up the stairs behind him. "We trained for this specific thing. I knew the obstacles, I knew what I was walking into, and I had what I needed." He paused. "Fawkes." She looked at him for a long moment in the torchlit corridor, and whatever she was feeling, and it was something, clearly, the specific feeling of someone who had spent 40 years building a professional distance from her students and was finding that distance insufficient in this particular moment, she kept it composed except for the slight brightness in her eyes that she would absolutely not acknowledge. "Hospital wing," she said crisply. "All of you. Now." "We're not hurt," Ron said. "Now, Mr. Weasley," she said, in the voice that had no negotiation in it. They went. Madame Pomfrey clucked over them with the professional displeasure of someone whose job was made significantly harder by students going places they shouldn't, and found nothing wrong with any of them, and gave them all chocolate frogs on the grounds that they were pale, and sent them to bed at 2 in the morning with the instruction that they were to sleep until she personally came to get them. Harry lay in the hospital wing and looked at the ceiling. The scar didn't ache. It hadn't ached for years, really, had been such a constant low presence that the absence of aching was actually the same as the absence of something he'd had forever, and the cleanness of it was still strange, still something he was adjusting to. Like silence after years of background noise. "Harry," Hermione said, from the bed beside his. She was supposed to be asleep. "The stone," she said quietly. "What happens to it now?" "I'll talk to Dumbledore," Harry said. "He should return it to Flammel. It was never meant to be a bait trap." "And Voldemort?" "The rest of him. He still exists. Somewhere." "I know," Harry said. "But he's less now. Less than he was. Without the fragment in my scar, without whatever anchor that gave him, he's more unmoored." He paused. "He'll come back eventually. Some other way. But not this year." Hermione was quiet for a moment. "You're not afraid of that?" "No," Harry said. "We'll be ready. We'll be more ready every year." He paused. "Go to sleep, Hermione." I know," he said. "Me too. Sleep anyway." A pause. Then, "You were brilliant tonight." "You were brilliant," he said. "The potions puzzle in 6 seconds." 11 seconds, she said. "I counted." Incredibly slow, he said. She made a sound that was almost a laugh and pulled her blanket up, and Ron, 2 beds over, said, "Both of you, please, for the love of," and then was quiet, and the hospital wing settled into the particular dark of a room full of people choosing to rest because they have done what they came to do and can, for now, put everything else down. Outside the window, the sky over Scotland was beginning to show the first thin distinction between night and dawn, not light yet, but the suggestion of it, the sky's announcement that it was getting ready. Harry closed his eyes. The scar was cool and quiet, and Fawkes was somewhere in the castle doing what Fawkes did, and his friends were alive and asleep, and the stone was in McGonagall's hands, and somewhere in a circular office above a gargoyle, Dumbledore was about to receive a visit from his deputy that was going to be, by any measure, a very significant conversation. Harry let himself sleep. For the first time in 11 years, there was nothing else in there with him. Just him. It was, he decided, as his mind softened into sleep, the right size. Chapter 6. What you build after the ashes. 3 days after the chamber, Hogwarts had the particular quality of a place that knew something had happened and was waiting for someone to explain it properly. The students knew something. Not the specifics were being managed with the careful inadequacy of all institutional communications, which is to say that the official version was that a security incident had been resolved and that all students were safe, which answered none of the questions anyone was actually asking and successfully ensured that every version of the story currently circulating in the castle was more dramatic than the truth. Harry had heard 3 different accounts of what had happened, none of which included him and 2 of which involved dragons. He found this restful. He was back in classes by Wednesday. Pomfrey had kept them through Monday with the firm insistence of someone who had decided that not injured and ready to be up and about were 2 different standards and she applied the higher one. Tuesday had been Dumbledore. That conversation deserved its own accounting. He'd gone up the spiral staircase Tuesday morning, alone, and found the office different from his last visit. The instruments on the spindle-legged tables were changed, some that had been running were now still, some new ones had been set up that he didn't recognize, and Dumbledore himself was different in a way that was harder to quantify. Still himself. Still the weight of the white beard and the blue eyes and the presence of a man who had been the most powerful thing in most rooms for 70 years. But something had shifted in him, something structural, and Harry was reminded of a building after renovation, the same exterior, but the inside had been reorganized. McGonagall had happened to Dumbledore. That much was clear from the way the old man held himself. "Sit down, Harry," he'd said, and Harry had sat. "The stone is with McGonagall," Harry said. "I told her it should go back to Flamel." "I've already written to Nicholas," Dumbledore said. "He and Perenelle have decided to destroy it." Harry absorbed this. "Their choice." "Yes," Dumbledore said. He looked at Harry with those eyes that were doing real seeing, as they always did now, the performance of wonder having apparently been retired sometime around the Monday McGonagall had been in this office for 2 hours with the door closed. "You accomplished something extraordinary on Saturday night." "We did," Harry said. "The fragment is gone." "Not a question." "Yes. I can see that," Dumbledore said quietly. He was looking at Harry's forehead. "I built instruments to track it. They've all gone quiet." A pause. "In 51 years of planning, I never considered the possibility that the fragment could be dissolved without the method you used. Fawkes and the love magic combined. It shouldn't have worked. The theoretical literature was quite clear that a soul fragment of that nature could only be destroyed through a death event." He held Harry's gaze steadily. "Your death. Temporary, I believed, but you were going to let me die," Harry said. "Not accusatory, just precise." "I was going to arrange the circumstances," Dumbledore said, "by which you would die, briefly, at the correct moment, in the belief that the fragment would be destroyed in the process and that the love protection would bring you back." He said this with the specific flatness of someone who has said the same thing to themselves many times in the past 3 days and has decided that continuing to frame it gently is a form of dishonesty he no longer has the stomach for. "I convinced myself it was an acceptable cost." I convinced myself that you would understand, eventually, if everything went as planned. He paused. I convinced myself of a great many things that were, on examination, more convenient than true. The fire was steady and warm. You convinced yourself, Harry said, because the alternative was admitting that your plan required you to sacrifice a person without their knowledge or consent, and that a plan requiring that wasn't a good plan, it was just a plan with a good goal. Dumbledore was quiet. I don't think you're a bad person, Harry said. I want to be clear about that, because I think it matters to say it and I think it's true. I think you're someone who has been doing this for 50 years, who watched Grindelwald, who watched Voldemort, who has seen more death than most people can hold in their minds, and who decided at some point that the equation of how many people were saved versus how many were spent was a legitimate framework for making decisions about other people's lives. He paused. I don't agree with that framework. But I understand how you got there. That, Dumbledore said, very quietly, is either remarkable maturity or remarkable generosity for an 11-year-old. Probably both, Harry said. My childhood gave me a lot of practice at understanding people who didn't have my interests at heart. The words landed gently and accurately and Dumbledore received them the way they were intended, not as a blade but as a fact. What do you want from me? Dumbledore asked. Directly. Without strategy. Harry had thought about this answer, because it was the important one and it deserved thought. Honesty, he said. When I ask a question, a direct answer. When you know something that affects me, you tell me. When you're making a plan, you tell me what it is and you ask whether I'm willing to be part of it. He paused. I'll fight Voldemort. I'll do it willingly and I'll do it effectively. I don't need to be managed into it. I just need to be treated like someone who gets to choose. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that it was real thought and not preparation. I can do that, he said. I will do that. Another pause. I want to tell you that I'm sorry. Not as a performance of contrition, I think you'd see through that anyway, but because I am, genuinely, sorry. For the blocks. For the cupboard. For the years of watching from a distance when I could have, he stopped. For making you into a piece before I ever asked who you were. Harry held this. It was real, he thought. It had the quality of something that had been sitting inside the old man for a long time and had finally found the door to leave by. Okay, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. That doesn't mean everything's fixed, Harry said. It means I heard you, and it was real, and we can move forward from it. He stood. And Professor, the things you know about Voldemort. The Horcruxes. Dumbledore went very still. Yes, Harry said. I worked that out too. A soul that fragments when it commits murder, the practice of hiding pieces of it in objects to anchor yourself to life. He made more than one. He looked at the old man. When you're ready to have that conversation honestly, I'm here. He left. Now it was Wednesday, and he was in Transfiguration, and McGonagall was teaching them the principles of switching spells with the focused precision that characterized everything she did, and the ordinary machinery of the school year was running again around Harry with the comfortable resilience of a system that had weathered a great deal of history and was not particularly destabilized by any given week of it. Ron was taking notes with the particular care of someone who has recently been reminded that the school year continues regardless of what happens in underground chambers, and periodically sent Harry sidelong looks that communicated the specific satisfaction of someone who had done something difficult and was still alive and was finding this fact generally excellent. Hermione was taking notes with the focused intensity she always brought, but there was something slightly different in her today. A looseness, a quality of being slightly more present in the room than she usually was, as though something that had been drawing her attention forward had resolved itself and she was, temporarily, just here. After class, they went to the grounds. Not for any particular reason except that the castle had been a contained space for 3 days and the November afternoon was clear and cold and bright in the way that Scottish weather occasionally managed before remembering what it was. They sat on the steps by the entrance. Fawkes had followed them out and was perched on the stone balustrade, turning his face into the low sun with the expression of a phoenix communing with something the others couldn't access, which was fairly characteristic. "Okay," Ron said, "to the grounds in general. I've been waiting to ask this because Pomfrey was hovering and then it seemed like the wrong time, but we're outside now and I need to know." He turned to Harry. "The fragment. The thing in your scar. It's actually gone." "Yes," Harry said. "And Voldemort is, still out there somewhere," Harry said. Less coherent than he was. "No body, no anchors he can reliably use, the fragment that was acting as a kind of, a connection point, gone." He thought about it. "He'll find another way eventually. He's not the type to stay gone." "What type is he?" Hermione asked, and it was a genuine question, not a rhetorical one. She was looking at Harry with the expression she used when she wanted his specific perspective because it was different from what she could access on her own. Harry thought about the voice in the darkness, the cold intelligence behind the glass. "Obsessive," he said. "Brilliant, genuinely. Completely unable to accept that there are kinds of power he doesn't have access to." He paused. "Lonely, in a way he'd never admit and probably doesn't consciously know. He made himself into something that can't be loved and then spent his whole life being furious about it." He turned the thought over. "The thing I kept thinking, when I was talking to him, Tom Riddle was a person before he was Voldemort. I'm not sure how much of the person is still in there. But whatever went wrong, it went wrong early, and nobody caught it, and then by the time it was visible it was too late and too large." Ron stared at him. "You feel sorry for him?" "Not sorry enough to let him win," Harry said. "But, yes. A bit. In the way you can feel sorry for a fire for being a fire while you're still putting it out." Hermione was quiet for a moment. "Dumbledore mentioned the Horcruxes," she said carefully. "It wasn't a question. I mentioned them to him," Harry said. He confirmed it. "There are more. He doesn't know how many. He's been trying to work it out." "So this isn't over," Ron said. "It was never going to be over in a year," Harry said. He looked out at the grounds, at the lake where the giant squid was doing its slow morning circuit under the ice-edged water. "But we're further ahead than we would have been. We know more. I know more, without the blocks, without the fragment, I can think about this more clearly than I could last week." He paused. "And Dumbledore is going to work with us now. Properly. You believe that?" Ron asked. "He's capable of honesty," Harry said. He was just convinced for a long time that honesty was a luxury that the stakes didn't allow. Something changed his mind. He glanced at them. "McGonagall helped." "McGonagall terrifies me in the most admirable possible way," Ron said. "She terrifies everyone in the most admirable possible way," Hermione said. "That's what's admirable about it." Fawkes made a sound from the balustrade that suggested he had opinions on this but was choosing to keep them to himself. The afternoon passed the way good November afternoons in Scotland pass, in that specific combination of cold air and clear light that makes you feel the year solidifying around you, becoming something permanent out of what had been temporary. Harry did his homework by the common room fire and found that even potions, which he had been managing through sheer competence and strategic mediocrity around Snape's obvious preference for Slytherin students, was more engaging than it had been. He wrote a letter to Sirius Black. He'd found out about Sirius in the first week of November. Hermione, going deep into the archive research, had found the conviction records, the Azkaban sentence, the entire story, and had sat with it for 2 weeks before deciding what to do with it. A godfather in prison for a crime he hadn't committed. The real secret keeper who'd betrayed his parents was alive and hiding. The injustice of it was large and clear and required action, but he had been disciplined about timing. There was only so much that could be addressed at once, and the fragment in his scar had been the priority. The fragment was gone now. The letter took 3 drafts. The first was too formal, the second too emotional, the third was honest in the specific way of something written by someone who has decided that starting a relationship correctly is more important than starting it impressively. He told Sirius that he knew the truth. That he believed him. That he intended to do something about it. That he understood this would take time and work and legal machinery that he didn't yet have access to, but that he had a year to learn and people around him who were very good at researching things and a headmaster who now owed him a significant degree of cooperation. He gave it to the school owl and watched it go. The end-of-year exams came with the inexorability of things that have been scheduled and cannot be argued with, and Harry did well, better than expected by everyone except Hermione, who had revised her expectations upward weeks ago and calibrated her assessment accordingly. He was first in charms, second in transfiguration behind Hermione by 3 marks, and in defense against the dark arts he was first by a margin large enough that Flitwick, who was covering the practical component as a substitute for the professor currently in St. Mungo's, gave him an extra mark he hadn't asked for and seemed slightly awed while doing it. The Quirrell situation had been handled, in the end, with the particular quiet efficiency of institutions protecting their own. He was receiving care. His possession by Voldemort was being treated as a medical matter rather than a criminal one, which Harry thought was the right call. Quirrell had made a choice, yes, but the nature of what he'd been subjected to afterward put simple judgment in murky territory. He would not be returning to teach. The substitute for defense was a witch named Carmichael who had the no-nonsense quality of someone who had done actual field work and was slightly impatient with the theoretical component, which made her lessons the most practically useful Harry had attended all year. He paid sharp attention. The last week of term had the quality of a held breath. Exams done, scores posted, summer becoming visible on the horizon, the year tipping from something lived into something that would become memory. Harry sat on the steps again on the last clear afternoon and thought about what the year had been. 11 years of blocks. 1 phoenix. 1 night in a chamber. 1 conversation with Dumbledore in which the old man had, finally and genuinely, admitted that he'd been wrong. All the pieces of the thing he'd been before, the quiet boy, the careful boy, the boy who had learned to be small because being small was safer, were still present, but differently arranged, and the arrangement was his own. Neville sat beside him, working through a book on herbology with the focused contentment of someone who has found their thing and is spending time with it. He'd changed over the course of the year in the way of a plant given proper water, not dramatically, not all at once, but definitively, in the direction of something that had more space than it had started with. Next year, Neville said, without looking up. What about it? I'm going to be better, Neville said. At everything. Specifically at the things that matter. He turned a page. I decided. Harry looked at him. What changed? Neville thought about this with the honest deliberateness of someone who takes questions seriously. You, he said. Not in a hero way. Just, you made it seem possible to decide who you were going to be. Like it wasn't something that just happened to you. He paused. My whole life people have been telling me what I was. Not as clever, not as brave, not as, whatever. And I believed them. Because they were adults and they seemed to know things. He looked up. But you didn't believe what people told you you were. Even when it was Dumbledore. Especially when it was Dumbledore, Harry said. Right. Neville looked back at his book. So I decided I'm going to do that too. Harry was quiet for a moment. Then he said, you're going to be remarkable. I mean that. Neville turned a page. Yeah, he said, with the quietness of someone trying on a thing that fits and finding, with a mild surprise, that they were always the right size for it. I think so too. They sat in the November afternoon and the castle stood around them and above them Fawkes flew slow circles in the clear sky, trailing warmth in the cold air like a wake. The great hall at the end-of-year feast was loud and bright and full of the particular human energy of 400 people who have finished something together and are celebrating the specific accomplishment of not stopping. The house points had been tallied. Gryffindor was third, which was a reasonable result given that 3 of their first years had spent part of November underground, and Slytherin had 1, which Malfoy was making considerably more of than was dignified, and the tables were full of food and noise and the comfortable chaos of a community closing a chapter. Harry ate without performing contentment. He was actually content, which was better. Dumbledore stood to give his end-of-year address, and the hall settled in the automatic way of a room accustomed to the specific authority of that voice, and Harry looked up at the old man and listened with the full attention he now brought to everything. The address was different from what Harry imagined it would have been in a version of this year where things had gone as planned. Dumbledore spoke about the year with the careful clarity of someone who had revised their prepared remarks in the past week. He spoke about the importance of truth, not as a value to be weighed against other values, but as a structural necessity, the thing that made all the other values possible. He spoke about the courage it took to face what was real rather than what was convenient. He spoke, briefly, about the danger that was still present in the world and the importance of facing it with knowledge rather than without it. Then he looked, directly and without disguise, at Harry. "I have had the privilege, this year," he said, "of being taught something important by one of our first years." The hall went appropriately silent with the curiosity of students who had been waiting for this part of the story. I was reminded that the people we would protect deserve the dignity of knowing what we're protecting them from. That wisdom without honesty is just cleverness with better posture. He paused, and the blue eyes did something honest. "I intend to do better." The hall was quiet for a moment in the way it's quiet when something has been said that means more than the words on the surface of it. Then Percy Weasley started clapping, because Percy clapped at things that deserved it regardless of whether it was cool to clap, which was one of the things Harry was beginning to appreciate about Percy, and then the hall joined, and the sound of it bounced off the enchanted ceiling and the floating candles and the 1,000-year-old stones. Ron elbowed Harry in the ribs. "That was about you," he said. "I know," Harry said. "You're not going to be weird about it." "I'm going to eat my pudding about it," Harry said. "Good," Ron said, and reached for the pudding himself. Hermione, across the table, was looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone who has decided to let this moment be a moment without analyzing it, which was, Harry knew, an act of genuine effort on her part and therefore a genuine gift. After the feast, in the slow dispersal of students heading to dormitories or last-night common room gatherings, McGonagall found him in the entrance hall. "Potter," she said. Then corrected herself. "Harry." He waited. She looked at him with the expression she'd been wearing increasingly often over the past weeks, the expression of someone who had reorganized a significant portion of their interior landscape and was still getting used to the new layout. "Your summer arrangements," she said. "The Dursleys," Harry said. The words had a different quality now, not dread, just acknowledgement of an ongoing situation. "I know about the protection. My mother's sacrifice, maintained by blood proximity. I need to be there at least through summer." "At least through this summer," McGonagall said. There was something in her voice that was both a statement and a promise. "I intend to visit regularly. And I have written to Molly Weasley, who has indicated with some enthusiasm that she would like to host you for a portion of the summer, and I have determined that this is compatible with the requirements of the blood protection provided visits are bounded appropriately." She held his gaze. "You will not spend the entire summer in that house." Harry was quiet for a moment. The specific quality of the feeling this produced was difficult to categorize. It was in the family of gratitude but older and more complicated, the feeling you get when something you had stopped hoping for arrives unexpectedly and you have to make room for it inside yourself. "Thank you," he said. She nodded once, with the efficiency of a woman who was not comfortable with being thanked and had decided to accept it cleanly rather than deflect it. "One more thing," Harry said. She raised an eyebrow. "The Horcruxes," he said. "I want to work on this over summer. Research the nature of them, how many there might be, how to destroy them." He paused. "Dumbledore is going to help. But I want independent research. Hermione and I working on our own, cross-referencing with whatever Dumbledore knows." He met her eyes. "I want your help accessing the resources." She studied him. "This is not a normal 11-year-old summer project." "No," he agreed. "You are not a normal 11-year-old. Not since November 1st, he said. A pause. Then, I'll arrange access to certain restricted resources through the school library. To be collected before you leave on Friday. The access will be specific and supervised. She held his gaze. And Harry, some of what you find will be deeply unpleasant. I know, he said. You'll tell me what you find. Yes, he said. And you'll tell me what you know. She held his gaze for one moment with the look of a woman deciding to trust something, and then nodded, and turned back toward the staircase, and Harry watched her go with the specific feeling of watching someone become an ally, not just an adult being decent, but an actual ally, someone who had chosen to be on his side with full knowledge of what that meant. Thursday was the last full day. Harry spent it doing the small things of ending, returning library books, saying goodbye to portraits he'd become familiar with, sitting one last time on the steps with Fawkes while the grounds went pink and gold in the late afternoon light. He had a long conversation with the portrait of Dilys Derwent outside the hospital wing, who had useful knowledge of secondary magical education resources and was pleased to share them with someone who asked properly. He played one game of chess with Ron and lost comprehensively, and found the losing enjoyable in the way things are enjoyable when you're doing them in the company of someone who's actually better at them than you. In the evening, he sat with Dumbledore for one final conversation of the year. Not long, 30 minutes, but it had the quality of something that was establishing a new pattern for what these conversations would be. Dumbledore told him what he knew about the Horcruxes. Not everything, he was honest about the limits of his knowledge, which was itself a change, but the framework of it, the nature of the magic, the rough estimate of how many there might be based on what he'd been able to research. Harry listened and asked good questions and pushed back twice on assumptions he thought were unsupported, and Dumbledore engaged with the pushback without defensiveness, and by the end of it they had something that was not friendship and was not the mentor-student relationship Dumbledore had originally designed. It was more like two people who had chosen to work together after a difficult renegotiation, with terms that were clear and mutual and honest. Harry thought this was better than what had been planned. On Friday morning, in the pale early light, Harry packed his trunk with the practical thoroughness of someone who had learned that what you carry matters. His books. His wand. The small collection of things he'd accumulated over the year that had meaning. Fawkes, who could not be packed and did not need to be, would travel independently and would arrive at Privet Drive with an indifference to Muggle sensibilities that Harry was already looking forward to. He was the last Gryffindor first year to come down the dormitory stairs, and when he came into the common room, Ron and Hermione and Neville were waiting, not because they'd arranged it, just because that's what happened when the right people were in the right place and the year had been what the year had been. Right, Ron said. Right, Harry said. Letters, Hermione said firmly. Weekly. Minimum. I'll be doing summer reading and I want someone to argue with. All right, Harry said. You'd better, she said, and she said it in the way she said things that she meant absolutely, without any of the social softening that she sometimes applied to important statements. And I'm going to look into the Sirius Black case. Properly. There are avenues I haven't pursued yet and I think there's a procedural argument for a retrieval petition to the Wisengamot that hasn't been made because nobody tried. Harry looked at her. Thank you, he said, and it was the same word he'd said to McGonagall and meant the same complicated thing. Neville put his hand out. See you on the 1st, he said. Harry shook it. See you on the 1st. They went down to the carriages, through the entrance hall, into the September cool in reverse morning, and the castle stood behind them in the clear light with the steadiness of something that had been there for 1,000 years and was not going anywhere, and Harry looked back at it once from the carriage door. It was his. Not in the way of possession, in the way of belonging, which is different and better. The 1,000-year-old stones that had learned the shape of him. The corridors that had opened slightly when he needed them to. The library that held everything Hermione was going to read over summer. The circular office where an old man was learning, slowly and genuinely, a different way of being wise. His world. Actually his, earned and understood and not managed into him by someone else's careful plan. He climbed into the carriage and the door closed and the grounds moved past in the window and the road to Hogsmeade Station opened up ahead, and Fawkes was somewhere above them in the morning sky, flying free, covering the distance the way phoenixes cover it, not quickly or slowly, but with complete indifference to the idea that the distance was a problem. "What do you think summer is going to be like?" Ron asked. "Better than previous summers," Harry said. "Considerably." Ron nodded. He was watching the grounds go past in the window with the expression of someone who was already partly somewhere else, already home, already in the Burrows' kitchen with its smell of something good and its noise of 6 siblings and its fundamental, uncomplicated warmth. Then he came back. "You know what I keep thinking about?" "What?" "The chess match," Ron said. He said it with the slight distance of something he was examining from a perspective he hadn't had while it was happening. "Not winning it. Just, playing it. Knowing exactly what to do and doing it." He paused. "It felt like being completely myself. Like nothing was in the way." Harry understood this precisely. "Yes," he said. "That's what Fawkes gave you," Ron said. He wasn't being poetic, just accurate, in the direct way Ron was accurate when he was saying something that mattered. "That feeling. All the time." "Not all the time," Harry said. "But more. Most." He thought about it. "It's not that everything's easier. Things are still difficult. But the difficulty feels like the actual difficulty, not an extra layer of difficulty that wasn't supposed to be there." He paused. "Like climbing a proper hill instead of climbing a hill with something tied to your leg." "Yeah," Ron said. "Yeah, that's." He looked at Harry with the simple, uncomplicated directness of someone who was his friend and found this unremarkable and permanent. "Good." The station appeared around the curve of the road, the scarlet of the Hogwarts Express visible against the grey stone of Hogsmeade, steam rising into the morning air. Students were loading trunks and saying goodbyes and doing the thing that all school years end with, the specific dispersal of a community that has been concentrated in one place and is releasing back into the world it came from, carrying everything the year has made of it. Harry loaded his trunk and stepped onto the train and found a compartment and put his feet up on the seat across from him, which he had not been allowed to do in the Dursley household under any circumstances, and when Hermione came in and saw his feet and opened her mouth to say something about it, Ron came in behind her and immediately also put his feet up, and Hermione closed her mouth and sat down with dignity and pretended to read the book she'd already read twice, and Neville appeared at the door with his toad and a chocolate frog and sat next to Harry, and the train started, and the castle fell behind them into the distance. Harry watched it go until the curve of the track took it out of sight. He thought about Voldemort, still out there, still incomplete, still the same cold intelligence that had pressed against his scar for 11 years, now without that anchor, now more formless and more desperate and therefore more dangerous in some ways and less in others. He thought about Horcruxes, the work ahead, the years it would take and the things they would need to know. He thought about Sirius Black in Azkaban, wrongly, and what it would take to get him out. He thought about the piece of Tom Riddle that had been in his head and was now gone, dissolved by a phoenix's tears and a mother's love and the stubborn refusal of both to accept that some things couldn't be healed. He thought about Dumbledore, who was not fixed but was trying, which was the honest best that anyone could do. He thought about Fawkes, somewhere above the train in the open sky, flying because he wanted to. And Harry thought, I am 11 years old, and I know things I shouldn't know, and I have friends I would have given a great deal to have 3 months ago, and the world is genuinely dangerous and also genuinely worth fighting for, and I am going to fight for it on my own terms, with my eyes open, without being managed or diminished or aimed by anyone else's careful plan. He thought, I choose this. That was the difference. That was the whole of it. Not prophecy. Not Dumbledore's architecture. Not 51 years of careful construction leading to a predetermined end. Just Harry Potter, unblocked, unmanaged, awake, choosing. He put his feet down, sat forward, and said to Hermione, Tell me what you found about Horcruxes. She looked up from her book. The look she gave him was the look of someone who had been waiting for this question and had, in fact, been organizing her answer since Tuesday. Right, she said, and sat forward, and began. The train moved south through the grey Scottish morning, carrying 4 children who were going home carrying a year that had changed them, and outside the windows the highlands went past in their enormous indifferent grandeur, and above the train a red gold phoenix flew in wide circles, keeping pace, going wherever this was going. The year was over. The work was just beginning. That was fine. That was, in fact, exactly right.